What if your entire life changed at 30,000 feet? What if the stranger you saved mid-flight was the very man whose absence defined your childhood? Would you reach for forgiveness or demand answers? Meet Amara Ellis, a quiet, brilliant 12-year-old girl from Baltimore whose world is turned upside down when a chance encounter on a turbulent plane ride uncovers family secrets, buried betrayals, and a fortune that's both a blessing and a curse. As Amara struggles with questions of identity, belonging, and what it means to be truly chosen, she faces not just the storm in the sky, but the tempests inside her own heart. Can a child raised in hardship trust the promises of a father she never knew? What scars do hidden truths leave on a family, and how do you heal wounds you can barely speak aloud? As the airplane crosses continents, so does Amara's journey, testing the limits of forgiveness, courage, and the hope for a future she can call her own. Are you ready to fly through the storms and secrets of Amara's life? Hit like, share, and subscribe now, and join us on this unforgettable voyage. The story begins right here. Don't miss a moment. The hum of the jet engines was like a low lullaby, steady and oddly comforting, even as the rest of the world felt uncertain. Across the aisle, a flight attendant handed out small, crumbly cookies and cans of ginger ale, her smile polite but distant. The passengers of Flight 922 to Seattle were settling in, businessmen opening laptops, teenagers plugging into headphones, an elderly couple flipping through an airline magazine, and at seat 12B, a girl who had grown used to being invisible. Her name was Amara Ellis. She was 12 years old, skinny and sharp-eyed, with a tangle of tightly coiled hair and the quietness of someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. Amara's knees hugged the backpack on her lap, her sneakers brushing the scuffed metal seat rail. She glanced at the world through the round window, saw only clouds, and tried to guess how many hours before she would touch down in a city that was nothing but a name and a hope. Her hands played with the frayed strap of her backpack, a faded blue thing that had once been her mother's. Inside was a paperback novel she'd nearly finished, a crumpled photo of her grandmother, and a letter sealed in an envelope marked "For Seattle Only." The letter's presence weighed on her more than the bag itself. It was from her grandmother, Mabel Ellis, and it was the reason Amara was on this plane, flying alone, entrusted to the care of strangers in uniforms who called her sweetheart and handed her a plastic badge reading "Unaccompanied Minor." She was used to taking care of herself, but there was something about this flight, about this journey, that made her small again. It was as if the distance between Baltimore and Seattle could swallow her whole, or transform her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The seat next to her, 12A, remained empty for the first 20 minutes of boarding. Every time someone paused in the aisle, Amara tensed, bracing herself for a neighbor. She hoped for a quiet reader, or maybe a motherly woman like the librarian back home. But when the occupant finally appeared, he was neither of those things. He was a man, tall and angular, with skin like old paper and hair silver at the temples. He wore a suit that looked expensive but rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. He moved slowly, with the weariness of someone who had spent too many hours in airports and boardrooms. A flight attendant greeted him by name. "Mr. Archer," she said, with a deference that told Amara he was someone important, though he seemed not to notice. He took the aisle seat, 12A, glancing at Amara only briefly, a polite nod. A flicker of curiosity quickly shuddered. His hands trembled as he stowed his briefcase beneath the seat. Amara saw the gold cufflink glint at his wrist, the way his fingers hovered, almost afraid to touch anything for too long. The rest of the cabin filled. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, and the plane began to taxi. Amara felt her stomach tighten as they lifted off. the world below shrinking into toy houses and lines of traffic. She pressed her forehead to the window, watching until the clouds claimed everything. Minutes passed in silence. She tried to focus on her book, but the words blurred. She stole a sideways glance at the man beside her. He seemed restless, checking his watch, fidgeting with the buckle of his seatbelt. There was a sadness about him, something raw and exposed, though he carried himself like a man who had built walls higher than any she'd ever seen. The drink cart arrived. Amara requested apple juice, her voice barely above a whisper. The man beside her asked for sparkling water, declined the cookies, and turned down a meal. "Not hungry," he said, almost to himself. His accent was faintly southern, but worn thin by years of traveling. For a while, the cabin quieted, the hum of engines lulling most into dozing or reading. Amara tried again to read, but she kept returning to the sealed letter in her backpack, her thumb tracing the raised writing on the envelope. For Seattle only. Her grandmother had pressed it into her hands the night before she left, saying only, "You'll know when to read it." The mystery of it made her uneasy. Her grandmother, never one for secrets, had seemed sad and urgent, her eyes too bright, her hands cold as she'd smoothed Amara's hair and whispered, "Be brave. You're stronger than you know." Amara wanted to believe her. She wanted to feel strong, or at least ordinary. She wanted to be the kind of girl who could disappear into a crowd, whose life was not shaped by the loss of a mother, the fragility of a grandmother, or the absence of answers about her father. As she watched the flight attendants check seatbelts and collect trash, a sudden jolt of turbulence rocked the plane. Drinks rattled, a few nervous laughs bubbled up, but most passengers ignored it, accustomed to the mid-air bumps. Amara's heart pounded, her hands clutching the armrests, but she forced herself to breathe. The man in 12A didn't flinch. In fact, he seemed almost relieved, like the shaking of the plane matched something inside him. When the turbulence passed, Amara caught him looking at her, a question in his eyes. "First flight?" he asked. She shook her head, managing a small smile. "No, sir, but I haven't flown alone before." He nodded, thoughtful. It can be strange, being between places, not quite gone, not quite arrived. Amara considered this. She'd always felt between childhood and whatever came next, between one home and another, between knowing and not knowing. He turned away, pulling a small notepad from his jacket pocket and scribbling something. Amara pretended not to notice, but she was curious. She liked watching people, guessing their stories. She wondered what could trouble a man with gold cufflinks and a name the crew seemed to respect. Soon, an announcement came over the speakers, bad weather ahead. The captain's voice was calm, but there was a new tension in the air. The flight attendants moved quickly, securing carts, checking that seat backs were upright. Amara felt the plane dip, the lights flicker. A child somewhere behind them began to cry. The man in 12A pressed his eyes shut, took a long breath, and muttered something she couldn't hear. Amara remembered her grandmother's advice: whenever you're scared, look for someone else who might be more scared. Help them if you can. She glanced behind her, saw a boy younger than herself gripping his mother's hand, tears streaking his cheeks. Across the aisle, an old woman was clutching her chest, breathing shallowly. She hesitated, then unbuckled her seatbelt, just for a moment, and reached for the flight attendant. "That lady," she said quietly, pointing. "She doesn't look okay." The flight attendant rushed over, kneeling beside the woman, speaking in a low, urgent tone. The man in 12A watched Amara, surprise and something like approval flickering across his features. "Good eye?" he said softly, as the crew called for a medical professional. Amara didn't answer. She was still shaking. She wished her grandmother were here. But the old woman across the aisle, who had been pale and gasping, now smiled weakly at her and squeezed her hand. The crisis, for now, was averted. The plane rocked and shuddered through another patch of turbulence, but Amara felt steadier. The act of noticing and helping someone else grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. Later, as the lights dimmed for the overnight flight, Amara closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of the engines lull her. But sleep was slow to come. The sealed letter pressed against her side. The memory of the crying boy, the frail woman, the unreadable man at her elbow all circled in her thoughts. Her mind was a storm of questions, regrets, and hopes. She wondered about the father she'd never met. She wondered if Seattle would be a new beginning or just another disappointment. She wondered if the man beside her had secrets as heavy as hers. Before she drifted off, she heard him sigh, a low sound of defeat. And then he whispered so quietly she almost missed it. "Please, just let this flight end well." Amara didn't know if he was talking to God, to himself, or to someone long gone. But she felt the wish settle over both of them, a fragile hope against the vast darkness outside. As she slept, the plane sailed on through the night, carrying a girl in seat 12B who was about to change more lives than she could possibly imagine, including her own. The night sky outside the plane was bottomless, a rolling ocean of darkness, punctuated only by the faint glow of distant stars. Inside the softly lit cabin, voices had faded to murmurs, the world reduced to the hush of engines and the breathing of strangers crammed together, yet each isolated in their own patch of space. Amara Ellis lay curled in her seat, the thin airline blanket pulled up to her chin. She was half asleep, caught in that drifting borderland between dream and waking, when a sudden jolt made her eyes snap open. The overhead lights flickered. Someone coughed. A seatbelt sign chimed, flashing red above the aisle. Mr. Archer sat upright now, his eyes fixed on the window. The silver light from the wingtip danced across his features, revealing new lines, new shadows. Amara watched him from beneath lowered lashes, unsure why she was so curious about this stranger. Maybe it was because he seemed as uneasy as she felt, despite the cool front he projected. As the turbulence eased, a flight attendant appeared, whispering to Mr. Archer. "Would you like anything to help you sleep?" she asked. Voice gentle, as if she'd made this offer before. He shook his head, barely looking up. "No, thank you. I'll manage." But he didn't relax. His hands twisted in his lap, fingers worrying the gold cufflink until Amara thought it might snap free. She closed her eyes again, pretending to sleep, but her ears stayed open. After a few minutes, Mr. Archer let out a breath. "Are you awake?" he asked softly, not turning toward her. Amara hesitated, then nodded. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to disturb you." "It's okay," she replied. "I don't sleep much on planes." He smiled faintly, a shadow of humor passing across his lips. "Me neither. Too many years flying, I suppose. Or too many regrets." She considered this. Amara was used to grown-ups who hid things, who spoke around the truth. This man, though, seemed like he was carrying something heavier, something he didn't have the energy to keep buried. Maybe that's why she found herself responding with honesty instead of retreating into silence. "I'm going to Seattle," she offered. "My grandma says it's the land of coffee and rain." He gave a soft chuckle. "That's about right. You visiting family?" She nodded, though the word felt strange in her mouth. "Sort of. My grandmother says there's someone I need to meet." Mr. Archer glanced at her, curiosity replacing some of his fatigue. "Someone important." She shrugged. "She says he might be. I don't know him. Not really." He nodded slowly, turning the words over. "Family's complicated," he said at last. "Sometimes you find it where you least expect it. Sometimes you lose it the same way." Amara wondered what he meant, but she was too shy to ask. She clutched her backpack tighter, fingers brushing against the sealed envelope again. Did he have secrets? 2. Did everyone? The plane banked gently, and for a moment she caught a glimpse of the city lights far below, towns glowing like embers in the darkness. Amara pressed her forehead to the cold glass, letting herself dream of what might be waiting in Seattle, a new friend. Maybe, or just an answer to all the questions she'd kept hidden in her heart. "Do you travel a lot?" she asked suddenly. Mr. Archer's mouth twisted into something like a smile. "Too much. Work, mostly. Sometimes I forget where I'm supposed to be until someone tells me." "That sounds lonely." His expression flickered, just for a moment. "It is, sometimes. But I suppose we all get used to our own company." They fell into silence again, but it was more comfortable now, a companionable quiet, like the hush of two people listening to rain from opposite ends of the same porch. A flight attendant came by with water and offered Amara a second cookie, which she accepted with a grateful nod. She nibbled it slowly, letting the crumbs melt on her tongue. Mr. Archer declined everything, staring into the middle distance as if he could see through the cabin walls and out into the night. A PA announcement rattled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are expecting some moderate turbulence over the Rockies. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The cabin lights dimmed even further, and a hush settled. The plane trembled, a shiver running through the metal bones. Amara felt her heart begin to race, fear prickling at the back of her neck. She pressed her hands into her lap, trying to remember her grandmother's voice. "Breathe in for 4, out for 6. You're stronger than you know, Mr." Archer must have seen the fear in her eyes. He leaned in, his voice gentle, confiding. "I used to be terrified of flying when I was a boy," he whispered. "My father told me to pretend I was a bird just riding the wind. It helped. Sometimes." Amara managed a small smile. "Birds don't fly through storms." He laughed quietly. "No, I suppose they don't. But they do find a way through." The words landed, settling into her chest like a seed. She nodded, feeling something shift, a thread of courage unfurling inside her. The turbulence grew worse. A heavy jolt sent drinks spilling. An overhead bin rattled open before a flight attendant slammed it shut. Someone gasped. Another passenger cursed. Amara squeezed her eyes shut, trying to pretend she was anywhere else. Suddenly, a voice rose behind them. "Help my wife, she can't breathe." The entire cabin seemed to freeze. A man stood in the aisle, panic etched across his face. Beside him, a woman slumped sideways, her lips turning blue. A flight attendant ran for the medical kit. "Is there a doctor on board?" another attendant called, her voice barely steady. No one answered. Amara's mind raced. She remembered the womankind, gentle, offering her a tissue earlier when her nose bled from the dry air. Now she was limp, eyes fluttering. Without thinking, Amara unbuckled her belt and slid into the aisle, dodging the food cart. She knelt beside the woman, the husband sobbing nearby. "Can you hear me?" she asked, her voice trembling but clear. The woman didn't respond. Her breaths were shallow, wheezing. "Move back, please," said the attendant, but Amara held her ground. "I know first aid," she said truthfully, though her training was only from a summer camp class 2 years before. But the instructions had been drilled into her. Stay calm, check airway, listen for breath. She tilted the woman's head gently, trying to remember what came next. The cabin was deathly quiet. Suddenly, Mr. Archer was beside her. He knelt, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, his hand steady now. "I know CPR," he said to the attendant. "Let me help." Together, they checked the woman's airway, found her pulse weak but present. Her inhaler, the husband stammered, digging in his bag. He produced a small blue device, hands shaking so badly he'd dropped it twice. Amara grabbed it, fitting it into the woman's mouth as Mr. Archer held her upright. 1, 2, 3 puffs. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the woman's eyes opened. She gasped, sucking in air, her chest heaving. Her husband collapsed into tears. The cabin erupted in applause, relief breaking like a dam. Amara stumbled back to her seat, her heart pounding so loud she thought everyone must hear it. She felt Mr. Archer's hand on her shoulder, a brief squeeze, grateful and firm. "You did good," he said quietly. Amara tried to smile, but tears prickled at her eyes. She'd helped. Yes, but all she could think was what if it hadn't worked? What if she'd made things worse? The weight of what-ifs pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. A flight attendant knelt beside her, her face gentle. "You're very brave, sweetheart. Are you all right?" Amara nodded, wiping her eyes. She looked at Mr. Archer. "Thank you for helping." He shook his head. "You were the first one up. Sometimes, that's what makes the difference." As the adrenaline faded, exhaustion crashed over her. She burrowed into her blanket, shivering, her mind replaying the seen blue lips, panicked cries, the rasp of breath. She wondered if this was what being a hero felt like, or if it was just being in the right place, at the right time, with just enough courage to act. But as she drifted into a troubled sleep, one thought echoed in her mind. Maybe bravery wasn't about not being afraid. Maybe it was about being afraid and acting anyway. Later, when the plane was quiet again, Mr. Archer sat with his eyes closed, his breathing even but shallow. Amara watched him, wondering what ghosts haunted a man like that. In her half-dreaming state, she pictured him as a boy, sitting on a plane like this one, gripping his father's hand, wishing to be anywhere else. She thought about the secrets her grandmother carried, about the letter in her backpack. What would Seattle bring answers? Or just more questions? The captain announced they were passing over the Rockies, the worst of the turbulence behind them. People relaxed, some slept, some whispered, some checked on the woman who was now sitting up, drinking water, holding her husband's hand. Amara dozed, waking once to see Mr. Archer writing in his notepad, his face soft in the dim light. She wondered what he wrote: numbers, words, confessions. She wondered what he would whisper if he thought no one could hear. By dawn, the cabin was filled with a soft pink glow. As the plane glided toward Seattle, Amara looked at the city appearing through her window, its skyline sharp against the rising sun. She felt changed, though she could not have said how. The letter was still unopened, the meeting still ahead, but something in her heart had shifted a sense of possibility, of hope, maybe even of forgiveness, if only she could find the strength to let go of what held her back. The wheels touched down. Passengers cheered, relief and gratitude mingling with the tired hush of landing. Amara took one last look at Mr. Archer, who offered her a weary smile and a nod, a silent acknowledgement of all they'd shared, all that remained unspoken. As she stepped off the plane, letter in hand, Amara Ellis was no longer just a girl in seat 12B. She was something more, a survivor, a helper, a girl on the edge of her own story, about to learn what it meant to save and be saved, all at once. As the dawn washed the cabin in gold, Amara Ellis sat back in her seat, utterly changed by the night. Sleep had come in brief, trembling bursts, chased away by dreams of blue lips and desperate voices. But it was not just exhaustion that kept her awake. It was the hush of secrets, both her own and those that seemed to hover, unspoken, all around her. Mr. Archer remained quiet beside her, eyes closed, his features softened in the first light of day. If anyone had looked, they might have thought him asleep, but Amara sensed he was not. His breathing was too measured, his hands too tense in his lap. Even after the drama of the night, he was still carrying a weight that no one else could see. The sick woman and her husband were in the row behind, their voices low. Occasionally, Amara heard a grateful whisper or the rustle of the husband's jacket as he tucked it around his wife. She wondered if they would remember her face when they told the story later, or if she would become just a nameless girl in a memory shaped by fear and relief. She pressed her forehead to the window, letting the cold soothe her. Far below, the Cascade Mountains glimmered in the morning haze, their peaks shrouded by cloud. Somewhere out there, Seattle waited her grandmother, her destiny, the answers she had both craved and dreaded since the envelope first landed on her pillow. But first, there was still this journey, still the hours of uncertainty left to navigate, still the strange intimacy of the airplane's pressurized world. She glanced again at Mr. Archer, whose silence had become a presence as real as any conversation. Something about him, his calm during the crisis, his gentleness after, lingered with her. A flight attendant paused at their row, offering orange juice. "You did a brave thing last night," she said quietly to Amara, a kind hand on her shoulder. "We're all grateful." Amara blushed, embarrassed by the attention. "I just remembered what to do." "Mr." Archer opened his eyes, catching the end of the exchange. His gaze met Amara's, something grateful, something proud, but he said nothing, and the moment passed. Amara watched him for a long time after, wondering what kind of pain could make even a hero look so tired. As the cabin filled with the scent of breakfast, a new restlessness crept over her. She reached for her backpack, fingers trembling as she slid out the envelope her grandmother had given her. It was battered now, the edges curled from being handled so many times. Her name was written on the front, just Amara, in her grandmother's bold, looping script. Should she open it now or wait for solid ground, where the world was less likely to tilt beneath her feet? A battle waged in her chest, the urge to know, to rip away the veil of uncertainty and see what her grandmother had felt too afraid to say aloud. And the urge to hold on just a little longer to the fragile hope that things might be less complicated than she feared. Her fingers hovered at the flap. "You look like you're making a big decision." "Mr." Archer said quietly. Amara jumped, startled. She hadn't realized he'd been watching. "It's from my grandmother," she said, voice wavering. "She says it explains everything, why I'm here, who I'm supposed to meet in Seattle, but I'm scared to open it." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Sometimes the truth is heavy, heavier than the questions we've carried around for years. She nodded, glancing at him sidelong. "Do you ever wish you could go back before you knew something?" His mouth twisted. "Sometimes. Yes. But the not knowing can be its own prison. At least with the truth, you can decide what to do next." That made sense. Amara looked again at the envelope. Her stomach churned, but before she could decide, the plane lurched again, gentle, but enough to send her heart racing. The captain's voice came over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Seattle. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." She clutched the envelope, knuckles white. The city. The answers both were coming, whether she was ready or not. "Mr." Archer saw her anxiety. "You know," he said, The hardest part is usually waiting. Once you start moving, you find a way forward, even if it's not the way you imagined. Amara nodded, trying to believe it. The engines hummed. The air grew thicker, the windows fogging as they dipped beneath the clouds. In the hush before landing, a hush broken only by the whine of wheels and the shifting of luggage, Amara finally tore open the envelope. Inside was a letter, several pages thick. Her grandmother's handwriting filled every inch of paper, no wasted words, no room for confusion. She began to read, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear the captain's final announcements. My dearest Amara, I hope you are reading this somewhere safe, somewhere quiet. If you are, it means I wasn't able to tell you all these things myself, not because I don't love you, but because sometimes the truth is a mountain I couldn't climb face to face. You have always been the bravest soul I've known, and now I must ask you to be brave again. There is someone in Seattle who has waited years to know you, someone whose name I never told you, because I feared it would bring more pain than comfort. You deserve the whole truth now, not just the pieces I could carry. Your mother, May Ellis, was a force of nature, bright, brilliant, and broken in ways I couldn't always heal. She loved you fiercely, even on her hardest days. Your father, your biological father, never knew you. Not truly. He was a young man with dreams bigger than his courage, and when May told him she was pregnant, he ran. I told you he died. That wasn't true. He is alive, living somewhere in Seattle, building a life I once wished you could be a part of. You have a right to meet him if you choose, to hear his side of the story, or to walk away if that is what you need to heal. I will support you, whatever you decide. Forgive me for the secrets. Forgive me for thinking I was protecting you when I was only protecting myself from losing you. I hope you find in Seattle not just answers, but new beginnings. Love always, Grandma Mabel. By the time she finished, tears ran silently down Amara's cheeks. The secrets she'd suspected, the answers she'd feared, they were all here, plain as day, as unchangeable as the city coming into view beneath the plane's belly. She felt Mr. Archer's gaze, kind and patient. You okay? He asked, voice low. Amara nodded, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. Yeah, it's a lot. He hesitated, then reached into his briefcase and handed her a handkerchief. Sometimes it helps to have someone listen, he said. You don't have to tell me anything, but if you want to talk, I'm here. She hesitated. She had never trusted a stranger so quickly, but something in his manner so careful, so unassuming, made her want to confide in him. My mom died when I was little, she whispered. My grandma raised me. She never talked about my dad. I thought he was dead, but she lied. He's alive. In Seattle. I don't even know his name. Mr. Archer nodded, absorbing every word. Do you want to meet him? Amara shook her head. I don't know. I used to dream about him. You know, that he was someone important, someone who would come find me and tell me he was sorry for leaving. Now I just feel angry and scared. What if he doesn't want me? Or what if he does, but he's nothing like I imagined? Mr. Archer was silent for a long time. Then he said, My father left when I was young. I spent most of my life waiting for him to come back. When I finally found him, I realized he was just a man, not a hero, not a monster, just a person who made some bad choices. He looked at her, his eyes unexpectedly gentle. You don't have to forgive him. You don't have to even meet him. But whatever you do, do it for yourself, not for him, or your grandmother, or anyone else. Amara nodded, turning this over in her mind as the plane's wheels kissed the runway. The cabin burst into applause, passengers relieved to be safely back on solid ground. For Amara, the world had shifted. The answers were different now, but the questions, the fears, remained. The sick woman and her husband stopped by as passengers filed out, the husband's hand trembling as he reached for Amara's. "Thank you," he said, voice choked. "You saved her life." Amara flushed, ducking her head. "I just did what I could." Mr. Archer stood, gathering his bag. As they stepped into the aisle, he leaned closer, voice just for her. "Whatever you find in Seattle, Amara, remember you're stronger than any secret, stronger than you think." As they left the plane, Amara felt a strange peace settle over her. There would be more questions, more pain, more choices to make, but for the first time, she believed she could face them. She looked once more at Mr. Archer, who was waiting at the gate. "Will you be in Seattle long?" she asked, surprising herself. He smiled. "A few days. If you need a friend, I'll be around." She tucked the letter into her backpack, squared her shoulders, and followed the flow of passengers into the new city. The city of answers and beginnings. The journey on the plane was over, but the real journey, the journey of the heart, was just beginning. As Amara Ellis moved with the slow river of passengers down the narrow aisle, the strangeness of morning on the plane still clung to her like a second skin. The pressurized hush, the receding pulse of engines, the way her own heart seemed to echo every step she was adrift between two worlds that contained suspended reality of flight and the overwhelming promise of whatever waited for her in Seattle. At her back, the sick woman and her husband, Sandy and Mark, she'd learned were gathering their things. Mark offering a grateful, tired smile. Ahead, Mr. Archer's tall frame was easy to pick out among the shuffling crowd. He moved slowly, with the deliberation of someone who was used to commanding attention but didn't want it now. Amara took her time. She let other people pass, clutching her backpack and the crumpled letter from her grandmother. Her limbs felt heavy, as if she'd run a marathon in her sleep. Each step down the aisle was a reminder that her life was divided before the flight, and after, before the truth, and after. The jet bridge was cool and gray. She moved through the tunnel of metal and glass, pausing just beyond the threshold to inhale a deep, steadying breath. Seattle air wet, tinged with jet fuel and distant pine, seemed to promise both challenge and renewal. A voice beside her. "You all right?" It was Mr. Archer, waiting by the windows, one hand resting on the handle of his rolling suitcase. Amara nodded. "I think so." "Your first time in Seattle?" he asked, his tone gentle. "First time anywhere this far," she said, "except for D.C. on a school trip. I don't remember much, though." He smiled, a flash of warmth in the tiredness of his face. "It's a good city. It's a place for new beginnings, or for endings, if that's what you need." They walked together, silent at first, toward the baggage claim. The airport was busy but calm, a morning lull, with only the distant clatter of carts and the gentle murmur of travelers. For a moment, Amara let herself forget the letter, the fear, the fact that her father, her biological father, was somewhere in this very city. "What brings you to Seattle?" she finally asked, turning the question back to Mr. Archer. He paused, adjusting his grip on the suitcase. "Business, mostly. But sometimes, business is just an excuse. There are things in my past I need to reckon with, too." His voice was soft, the words dropping like stones into a well. Amara understood more than he realized. Grown-ups, she was learning, were just as lost as kids sometimes, just as afraid, As they neared the escalators, Sandy and Mark caught up. "Are you sure you don't want to meet our family?" Sandy asked Amara, her gratitude shining through exhaustion. "They'd love to thank you themselves." Amara shook her head, embarrassed. "No, thank you. I'm just glad she's okay." Mark pressed a business card into her hand. "If you ever need anything at all, call us. You have friends here now." It was a strange comfort. The idea that kindness could ripple outward, creating ties even among strangers. Amara slipped the card into her pocket and watched the couple disappear into the crowd, arm in arm. On the escalator down to baggage claim, Mr. Archer was silent. His jaw was tense, his eyes focused somewhere in the middle distance. Amara wondered, not for the first time, what secrets he carried. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked quietly. He blinked, startled, and then offered a wry smile. "Not just yet. But thank you. Amara, it means more than you know." They parted at the carousel, a brief, awkward goodbye. "Take care of yourself." "Amara," Mr. Archer said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Remember what I said? Do this for you, not for anyone else." She nodded, hugging her backpack close as he disappeared into the swirl of arriving travelers. Suddenly, she felt very small again, a single girl in a world of endless movement and noise. It took forever for her bag to appear. She counted the turns of the carousel, the faces in the crowd, the seconds between each pang of doubt and hope. When her suitcase finally emerged, she nearly wept with relief. Outside, the arrivals hall was a blur of reunions, people hugging, shouting, crying. Amara hovered by the sliding doors, uncertain. Who was supposed to meet her? The letter had only mentioned a name, Russell Crane. Was he her father? An uncle? A stranger, she scanned the crowd, searching for anything familiar. A sign with her name, the face of someone who looked like her. But everyone was a stranger, busy with their own reunions. Panic fluttered in her chest. What if no one came? What if she had to call her grandmother, confess that she was lost and alone in a city she didn't know? She closed her eyes, took another steadying breath, and tried to remember what Grandma Mabel had always told her. When you're scared, look for kindness. It's usually closer than you think. A gentle tap on her shoulder. She turned to find a tall, older black man in a crisp navy suit. His hair was close-cropped, salt and pepper, and his eyes, so much like her own, were warm and worried. "Amara," he asked. She nodded, too nervous to speak. He crouched to her level, the suit bunching at his knees. "I'm Russell Crane. Your father, he asked me to meet you. He wanted to be here himself." But Russell paused, searching her face for a sign that she understood. "He thought it might be too much for both of you. So I'm here instead to make sure you're safe, to answer any questions you want to ask, and to take you wherever you want to go." Amara stared at him, uncertainty warring with relief. She didn't know what she had expected: tears, maybe, or anger, or some sudden bolt of recognition. Instead, she felt numb, as if everything were happening to someone else. She found her voice. "Where is he?" "My father." Russell smiled gently. "He's in Seattle, not far. He wants to meet you when you're ready. But this part is about you, Amara, about what you need, what you want." She studied his face. There was no pity there, only patience. "Can we just drive for a while?" she asked. "I need to think." He nodded. "Of course." They walked through the parking garage together. Russell's stride was easy, but he never moved too far ahead. He waited for her at every turn, making space for her uncertainty. In the car, a quiet sedan, warm and clean. Russell drove with the radio low. The city rolled by glass towers, mist rising from the bay, cranes perched like birds above the skyline. Amara watched it all through the window, heart pounding. Russell broke the silence after a while. "Do you want to know about your father?" She hesitated. "Yes." "No." "Maybe just a little." He nodded, as if he'd expected this. "His name is Daniel Archer. He lives here. He's a good man, but he's made mistakes. He wanted to meet you from the start, but life got complicated. He thought he could protect you by staying away." Daniel Archer. The name fell into her mind like a stone, sending ripples through years of silence. "Does he know I'm here?" she asked. Russell nodded. "He's nearby. He'll wait as long as you need." Amara closed her eyes, struggling to breathe. The city, the flight, the letter, the stranger who wasn't a stranger, all of it pressed down on her. She remembered the words Mr. Archer had whispered just before the plane landed. "You're stronger than you think." Was he? Was her father the same man? Had he sat beside her, talked to her, offered comfort, never saying who he really was? The truth hovered, shimmering at the edge of her thoughts. She wanted to ask. She wanted to run. Russell watched her, kind and silent, not pushing. Finally, she asked, "If I say I don't want to meet him, if I say I'm not ready, will he understand?" Russell's eyes were gentle. "He'll understand. He loves you, Amara, even from far away. He always has." A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away, angry at herself for being so vulnerable. Russell reached over, handing her a clean handkerchief. "There's no wrong way to feel," he said. "Take your time. Seattle isn't going anywhere." They drove in silence for a long while. The city faded into trees, the highway curling beside a gray, restless bay. Finally, Russell pulled over at a quiet overlook, the whole city visible in the mist. "Do you want to get out?" he asked. Amara nodded, grateful for the chance to move. They stood side by side, looking out over the water. Seagulls wheeled overhead. Somewhere, a ferry's horn echoed across the bay. "Will he come here?" Amara whispered. Russell nodded. "If you want him to." She hesitated, heart in her throat. Then, softly, "Okay, he can come." Russell smiled, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're braver than you know." As the morning sun burned through the mist, Amara Ellis waited at the edge of the world, on the edge of everything she had ever known, ready at last to begin the journey not just of a flight, but of her own heart. Amara Ellis stood on the edge of the world. The city stretched below her, silver and blue, half shrouded in morning mist. The overlook where Russell Crane had parked was quiet except for the call of gulls and the steady hush of distant traffic. She felt as though she were suspended between past and future, floating in a moment that would define everything. Beside her, Russell waited. He was careful to give her space, yet never strayed so far she felt alone. His patience was a comfort, a gentle reminder that she could choose how this story unfolded, at least for now. Amara breathed in the air, heavy with dew and brine. Her mind replayed the letter from her grandmother over and over, her father's name, the choices that had shaped her life without her knowing, the ache of betrayal, softened only by love. Russell's phone buzzed, low and soft. He stepped aside to answer, voice hushed. Amara stared out at the city, at the ferries and bridges and tiny distant people living lives that seemed, for a moment, much simpler than her own. Russell returned, his face unreadable. "He's nearby," he said. "He's parked down the hill. I told him you might want a minute." Amara's stomach twisted. Her hands fidgeted in her sleeves. The weight of everything, the flight, the crisis, the letter, the not knowing pressed against her ribs, tight and relentless. "Do you want to go down?" Russell asked gently. She nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. They walked in silence. The slope was lined with damp grass, slick under her sneakers. As they reached the base of the hill, Amara could see a dark sedan parked by a lonely tree. The window was rolled down. A man waited in the driver's seat, his hands tense on the wheel. Amara slowed. She tried to read his face from a distance, but the sun was behind him, and he seemed only a silhouette, an outline filled with every hope and fear she had ever felt. Russell squeezed her shoulder. "Take your time," he murmured. "I'll wait here." Amara nodded, moving forward alone. The closer she came, the more her heart hammered. The man stepped out of the car. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a trim beard, dark hair streaked with gray. His eyes were nervous and bright, searching her face for something: recognition, forgiveness, perhaps even love. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Two strangers bound by blood and 1,000 unspoken words. Finally, the man Daniel Archer spoke. "Amara," he said softly, as though testing the weight of her name on his tongue. I'm so sorry it took me this long." His voice was familiar. She heard echoes of their conversations on the plane, the kindness, the patience, the sadness just beneath the surface. She remembered the way he had guided her through the night, his quiet support when the world tilted. All that time he had known, and all that time he had let her come to him, not the other way around. Why her voice trembled, but she stood tall. "Why did you wait? Why didn't you say anything?" Daniel looked down, shame painting his face. "I was afraid. Afraid I'd ruin your life. Afraid you'd hate me. When I realized who you were on the flight, I didn't want to take the moment away from you. I wanted to be there if you needed me, but only as much as you'd let me." He knelt to her level, his hands shaking. "You have every right to be angry, to hate me. But I've thought about you every day since your mother told me she was pregnant. I made mistakes, Amara. I let my fear make choices for both of us. I'm sorry." Amara searched his eyes for the truth. She saw regret, pain, but also a gentleness she remembered from her mother, something that made her want to reach out and trust, even when everything in her screamed for caution. "Did you love my mom?" she asked. Daniel nodded, his voice thick. "Very much. We were young. She was bright, fierce, complicated. I didn't understand her pain, but I loved her. When I left, it wasn't because I didn't care. I didn't know how to stay." Amara looked away, tears burning her eyes. "She told me you were dead." Daniel winced, as though the words were a physical blow. "I deserve that. I deserve whatever you feel." A long silence. The city thrummed in the distance. Amara felt herself pulled in two directions, toward the man before her, and back toward the only family she had ever known. "Finally," Daniel said, "I'd like to know you. Amara, I'd like to be in your life, if you'll let me. But if you're not ready, I'll wait. As long as you need." Amara's hands twisted together. She remembered the fear on the plane, the desperate plea in Daniel's voice when he begged for help for the sick woman. She remembered how he'd trusted her, listened, offered comfort when no one else did. That was real, wasn't it? Even if the rest was tangled in lies. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she whispered. Daniel nodded, accepting her words. "That's okay. You don't have to." Amara looked at him for a long moment, her breath shaking. Then, finally, she sat down on the curb, knees drawn to her chest. Daniel sat a few feet away, silent. They watched the city wake together. For a while, that was enough. When Russell joined them, he carried 2 cups of hot chocolate from a nearby cafe, the steam curling in the cold air. He handed one to Amara, who took it gratefully. Daniel wrapped his hands around the other as though anchoring himself to something solid. Russell sat beside Amara. "You hungry?" She shook her head. Her stomach was a knot. He smiled, understanding. "Do you want to go somewhere quiet or see the city?" Amara hesitated. She glanced at Daniel, unsure. Daniel met her eyes. "Whatever you want, Amara. I'm here for you. However you need." She surprised herself. "Can we just drive for a while?" Daniel and Russell nodded, wordless. They helped her into the car, Daniel in the driver's seat, Russell beside him. Amara sat in the back, clutching her hot chocolate, watching the city blur by. The car wound through Seattle's hilly streets. Sunlight flashed off the glass towers, ferry boats slid across the bay, and the clouds rolled low and gentle. Amara pressed her forehead to the glass, lost in thought. Russell pointed out landmarks: Pike Place Market, the Space Needle, old neighborhoods tucked between new construction. His voice was soft, a kind backdrop to the questions swirling inside her. She remembered Grandma Mabel's letter. "You deserve the whole truth, not just the pieces I could carry." Did she want the whole truth, or just enough to let her heart rest? Russell looked back. "Do you want to talk about your mother?" Amara shook her head. "Not yet." Daniel gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. "I'd like to tell you about her. Someday. About how we met. About the parts of her you might not remember." Amara felt a pang. She wanted to remember her mother, not the pain, not the loss, but the brightness Daniel described. Was it wrong to want both her grandmother's comfort and her father's stories? She didn't answer, and Daniel didn't push. They stopped at a park overlooking the city. Daniel and Russell sat on the bench while Amara wandered to the edge of the overlook. Wind tangled her braids, tugged at her jacket. She closed her eyes, let herself breathe. In the distance, a group of children played. Their laughter echoed. Amara watched, longing and envy twisting inside her. Would she ever feel that carefree again? Daniel approached slowly, giving her space. "When I was your age," he began, "I used to come here with my mother. We'd sit for hours, just watching the water. She said the city was a place of second chances." Amara glanced at him, curiosity flickering despite herself. "Did you get a second chance?" Daniel smiled, bittersweet. "Maybe. If you let me." They stood in silence. Amara felt a tug, something fragile, almost hope. She turned to him. "Why did you help on the plane?" Daniel looked surprised. "It was the right thing to do. You were brave, Amara, braver than anyone else there. I just tried to follow your lead." She studied him, searching for a lie, but saw only truth. "I was scared," she admitted. "I didn't know if I could do it." Daniel's eyes filled. "You did. You saved someone. You saved me, too, more than you know." Amara's throat tightened. She wanted to ask how, but the words wouldn't come. Back in the car, Russell handed her his card. "If you ever need anything, someone to talk to, a ride, anything, call me. You're not alone here." Amara took the card, her fingers trembling. For the first time, she believed it. As they drove back toward the city, Daniel spoke quietly. "There's someone else who wants to see you. Your grandmother, Mabel. She's waiting at my apartment. Only if you want." Amara's eyes widened. "She's here." Daniel nodded. "She wanted to be here for you, to let you choose how this story ends." Amara felt the last bit of resistance melt away. She nodded, silent, ready to face whatever waited: anger, forgiveness, or just the comfort of family. They drove in silence, the city unfolding ahead. At Daniel's apartment, the door opened and there was Mabel, her arms open, tears streaking her cheeks. Amara ran into her embrace, sobbing, all her fear and anger and love spilling out at once. Mabel held her tight. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you the truth. I was scared, too." Amara pulled back, searching her grandmother's face. "You don't have to be scared anymore." Mabel nodded, her smile trembling. "Neither do you." Daniel stood by the window, watching. Amara met his eyes, and for the first time saw not a stranger, not a secret, but the father she might one day come to know. They sat together, 3 generations tangled in love, regret, and the fragile hope of forgiveness. Outside, the city lights shimmered, and Amara understood the hardest journeys were not the ones that crossed oceans, but the ones that led us home. Seattle's late afternoon light filtered through the tall apartment windows, painting golden squares on the living room floor. Amara Ellis curled up in a faded blue armchair, knees to her chest, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that Grandma Mabel insisted was the cure for all kinds of tired. The apartment was strangely quiet, each tick of the kitchen clock louder than the last. Even the hum of the city outside buses, laughter, sirens felt distant, as though she were somewhere apart, suspended. Daniel Archer and Mabel stood by the kitchen island, their voices low, careful not to intrude. Every now and then, Amara caught fragments worry, hope, questions neither dared ask in front of her. She stared into her tea, feeling the weight of their concern, unsure if she was grateful or just exhausted. Russell had left soon after they arrived, promising to check in the next day. Amara was relieved. As much as she liked Russell's kindness, she needed fewer eyes on her, less expectation that she'd perform some neat, happy ending for the adults. She just wanted to be still, to think. Her body ached with the aftershocks of travel and emotion. Her mind, though, was restless, churning through old memories, trying to make sense of the new ones forming in this strange place. She glanced around the room. Daniel's apartment was filled with subtle signs of a life lived both luxuriously and alone. A grand piano no one seemed to play. Books stacked neatly but unopened. Photographs in heavy frames showing smiling adults and children she didn't recognize. Everything tidy, curated, almost sterile, like a hotel room waiting for someone to decide how long they'd stay. Mabel came and sat beside Amara on the arm of the chair, close but not crowding. "You want to talk, or you want me to just sit?" she asked softly. Amara hesitated. Then, "Can we just sit?" Mabel nodded, placing a gentle hand on Amara's shoulder. They sat in silence, the way you only can with someone who's known you since birth. After a long while, Amara spoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice was quiet, but the question was sharp. Mabel's hand tensed. "I wanted to protect you. Your mother, she was fragile, even before she passed. She made me promise to keep some things secret until you were old enough to understand." Her voice was rough with regret. "I thought I was doing right, but I see now, secrets have a way of finding you, and hurting you, too." Amara nodded, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. "I needed you to be honest." Mabel squeezed her shoulder. "I know. I'm sorry, baby. I really am." A pause. Amara wanted to ask so much more why adults always thought lying was kindness, whether her mother would have told her if she'd lived longer, why none of the grown-ups in her life ever seemed able to just trust her with the truth. But she was too tired to untangle it all tonight. She leaned into Mabel, breathing in the scent of lavender and old books, and let herself rest. Later, After a simple dinner of soup and crackers, food for people too weary to be hungry, Daniel returned to the living room, looking lost in his own home. He hovered in the doorway, uncertain, until Mabel nodded for him to join them. He sat across from Amara, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He seemed smaller tonight, less like the powerful figure from the plane, and more like a man trying to find his place in the world he'd made so complicated. "Would you like to see something?" he asked, voice tentative. Amara hesitated, then nodded. Daniel reached into a leather satchel and pulled out a wooden box, worn smooth with years of handling. He placed it gently on the coffee table and opened the lid. Inside were objects arranged with careful precision: a silver locket, a faded photograph of a young woman with Amara's eyes, a stack of letters tied with blue ribbon, a child's drawing in crayon labeled "Me and Mom and Grandma." "These are yours," Daniel said, "or they were once. Your mother gave them to me to keep safe. She wanted you to have them when you were ready." Amara's hands shook as she picked up the locket. She opened it, revealing two tiny portraits: her mother, smiling and wild-haired, and a man she now recognized as Daniel, younger, happier. She traced their faces with her thumb. "She wore this every day," Amara whispered. Daniel nodded. "She took it off only once when she left for Baltimore. She told me she couldn't wear it if she had to pretend I didn't exist." The pain in his voice made Amara's throat ache. She put the locket down and lifted the photograph. "Is this you and Mom?" He smiled, a real one this time, tinged with old sorrow. "Yeah, that was the night we met at a jazz club downtown. She dragged me onto the dance floor. I couldn't dance, still can't, but she made it look easy." Amara smiled, imagining her mother bold, laughing, pulling Daniel along despite his awkward steps. The image made her heart swell with longing for a past she never got to see. She turned to the letters, untying the ribbon. The handwriting was her mother's, curvy, looping, full of strange abbreviations and doodles in the margins. "Read them when you're ready," Daniel said. "No rush." She nodded, but tucked them close to her chest. She already knew she'd read every word before she slept. As night fell, Mabel prepared a bed for Amara on the pull-out sofa. Daniel offered his own room, but Amara shook her head. She needed the distance, the small privacy of her own space in this unfamiliar home. Once the lights were off, the city's glow spilled through the curtains. Amara lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, her mind whirling. How do you learn to trust someone whose absence shaped your entire life? How do you forgive the mother who loved you so much she left, and the grandmother who loved you so much she lied? She pressed the locket to her chest, the cold metal a strange comfort. She could almost hear her mother's voice, soft and full of mischief. "You're braver than you know. Mar, don't let anyone tell you what you can or can't do." Sleep was fitful, full of half-remembered dreams, voices just out of reach, shadows moving behind bright city lights. When morning came, she felt older, as if she'd lived years in a single night. Daniel was already up, making coffee, the kitchen smelling of cinnamon and hope. Mabel was on the phone, quietly arguing with someone about appointments and medicine, her own world of worries, never far away. Amara stood in the doorway, watching Daniel. He glanced up, startled, then offered a small, hopeful smile. "Do you want to talk?" he asked. Amara considered. Then, "Not yet." Daniel nodded, relief and disappointment mingling in his face. "Pancakes," he offered. She shrugged, then found herself smiling. "With chocolate chips." He grinned, and for a moment he looked almost young. "I'll see what I can do." As he cooked, Amara wandered the apartment, touching the edges of a life that might have been hers. Photos of Daniel with colleagues, plaques for business awards, a dusty tennis racket in the hall closet. He was a stranger, but in small ways. She could see pieces of herself reflected in his world, a stack of mystery novels on his nightstand, an unfinished crossword on the kitchen table, a half-eaten bag of gummy bears in the pantry. She tried to imagine growing up here, wondered if she'd still love books, still crave quiet corners, still dream of traveling somewhere new. Would she be the same person, or would everything be different? Breakfast was awkward, but less so than the night before. Mabel read the paper. Daniel fussed over coffee, and Amara dunked her pancakes in syrup until they were soggy. Afterward, Daniel suggested a walk. "There's a park nearby," he said. "You don't have to talk if you don't want." Amara hesitated, but nodded. The apartment felt too full of ghosts. They walked in silence at first, their footsteps echoing on the damp pavement. The city was waking up dog walkers, runners, people on their way to work, all moving with purpose. Amara felt like she was drifting out of sync with everyone else. Daniel slowed to match her pace. "Your mom used to bring you here when you were little. She said you loved the ducks." Amara searched her memory. Faint images surfaced: green grass, a pond, her mother's laughter as she chased after a wayward piece of bread. It felt like another life. They sat on a bench overlooking the water. Daniel watched the ducks, his hands resting awkwardly on his knees. "Why did you really leave?" Amara asked, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel was quiet for a long time. "I was scared of being a father, of not being good enough, of losing everything I'd worked for. My own dad left when I was a kid, and I promised myself I'd never do the same. But promises are easy when life is easy. When it got hard, I ran." He shook his head. "I regret it every day. I can't change what I did, but I want to try now, even if you never forgive me." Amara stared at the pond, anger and longing warring in her chest. She wanted to yell at him, to ask him why her pain had to be the price of his mistakes. But she also wanted to believe he could change, that people weren't doomed to repeat their parents' failures. "Maybe," she said finally, "you can start by just being here. Not perfect. Not anything but honest." Daniel nodded, his eyes bright with tears. "I can do that." They sat in silence, watching the ducks, the city, the morning sun breaking through clouds. For the first time, Amara felt something shift, not forgiveness. Not yet. But the possibility of it. That afternoon, Mabel took Amara to a bookstore, the kind with creaky floors and stacks of forgotten stories. They browsed for hours, Mabel buying her a new journal, for all the things you can't say out loud. Amara hugged it to her chest, grateful. On the walk home, Amara asked, "Do you think Mom would be proud of me?" Mabel stopped, crouched to Amara's level, and looked her in the eye. "Your mama loved you more than life itself. She'd be proud of you for your strength, your kindness, your heart, and she'd tell you that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's power, for you, not just for them." Amara nodded, tucking the words away. That night, she wrote in her new journal, "I'm not sure who I am to Daniel. I'm not sure who I am without all the secrets, but maybe I'm braver than I thought. Maybe that's enough for now." Outside, Seattle's rain pattered on the window, steady and soft, washing the city clean. Amara woke the next morning before sunrise. The apartment washed in blue-gray light. She felt suspended between worlds, no longer just the girl from Baltimore, not yet someone who understood her place in this new, tangled family story. Seattle's skyline looked different in the dawn, the city's towers softened by mist, the streetlights blinking out one by one. Amara sat up in the unfamiliar bed, journal open in her lap, pen poised, but her thoughts felt too heavy to turn into words just yet. She heard voices from the kitchen, Mabel's low, steady hum, Daniel's quieter, less certain tones, the soft clatter of dishes, the smell of toast, all meant to comfort. But Amara felt the tension beneath their efforts. She knew they were talking about her mother, about what came next. She wandered out in her socks and stood quietly at the threshold. They stopped mid-conversation, both looking at her with that mix of hope and uncertainty that was becoming familiar. "Morning. Sugar," Mabel said gently. Daniel just nodded, managing a small smile. "How'd you sleep, okay?" Amara lied, moving to the table. She poured herself orange juice and took a single bite of toast, suddenly aware of the quiet pressure in the room. She wondered if families ever got used to this, living with so much unsaid. After breakfast, Daniel checked his phone. "There's a call I have to take for work," he said, his voice apologetic. "I won't be long." Mabel shot him a look, but he'd already retreated to his office, shutting the door quietly behind him. Amara set her fork down. "Is it always going to feel like this?" she asked her grandmother, "like there's something wrong even when we're trying to be normal?" Mabel reached across the table and squeezed Amara's hand. "It gets easier, honey, but healing takes time. For all of us." Amara nodded, not convinced. She didn't want time, she wanted answers. A map of the future, a way to fit these new pieces of her life together without everything else falling apart. Later that morning, Mabel announced she was going to pick up prescriptions from the pharmacy and left Amara with Daniel. For a moment, they just stared at each other, both unsure how to bridge the distance. Daniel cleared his throat. "There's a park I used to go to when I needed to think," he said. Would you like to come with me?" Amara almost refused. She wanted to hide in her room to escape from the awkwardness, but something, maybe the tired hope in his voice, made her nod. "Okay." They walked in silence at first. Daniel's car was silent except for the jazz station, which played a soft, meandering saxophone solo that reminded Amara of rainy Sundays in Baltimore. The city was waking up, coffee shops busy, people waiting for buses, dogs straining at leashes. Amara pressed her forehead to the cool glass, wondering if any of them could see the storm brewing inside her. When they arrived, the park was mostly empty except for a few early morning joggers and a man feeding pigeons. Daniel led her to a bench by a pond. For a long time, they just watched the water, the way the wind riffled the surface and the clouds moved overhead. Amara didn't know how to start, so she waited. Daniel finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "When I first learned about you, I wanted to come find you right away, but I was scared. Amara, I was afraid I'd ruin your life, that I'd only bring more pain." Amara looked at him, surprised. "So you did nothing?" He winced. "I tried to do what I thought was best. I paid for things behind the scenes. I asked friends to check on you, make sure you and Mabel were safe. I tried to be responsible, but I didn't know how to be a father, not the way you deserved." She wanted to shout at him, to demand why her pain had always come second to his fear. Instead, she hugged her knees, fighting tears. "You could have tried. I grew up thinking I wasn't worth showing up for." Daniel's hands trembled in his lap. "I know. And I'm sorry. I can't undo that. But I want to try now, if you'll let me. I want to learn." They sat in silence, the kind that's both healing and raw. Amara stared at the ducks, remembering what her mother used to say. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about them. It's about letting yourself breathe again. "Do you want to know about Baltimore?" Amara asked quietly. Daniel's face softened. "I'd like that. Tell me anything you want." So she did. She talked about her school, how she was always the new kid, how teachers never seemed to expect much from her until she proved herself. She talked about Tanya, her best friend since second grade, and how they used to spend summer afternoons in the city library just to feel cool and safe. She talked about the time she and Grandma painted their stoop bright yellow, about the old men who played chess in the park, about the corner store that gave her free popsicles when it was too hot to think. Daniel listened, really listened, the way her mother used to. He asked questions, not the nosy kind, but the ones that let her know he cared. Amara felt the knot in her chest loosen. Just a little. At one point, she told him about the flight, that moment of turbulence. Russell's panic, the way she'd remembered her mother's calm voice and forced herself to help. Daniel listened in awe. "You saved my life, Amara," he said softly. "Not just on that plane. You're saving it now, just by being willing to talk to me." She looked away, embarrassed. But part of her wanted to believe it could be true. That afternoon, Mabel returned, and for a while, things felt almost normal. They made sandwiches, watched a silly movie, and played a board game Daniel dug out of the hall closet. But as evening fell, the tension crept back in. Mabel excused herself early, heading to her room with a headache. Daniel lingered in the living room, clearly wanting to talk more, but unsure how to begin. Amara sat at the window, watching the rain streak the glass. Her thoughts were a whirl of hope and hurt, longing and suspicion. Daniel finally spoke. "Your mom would have loved to see you here. She always dreamed of bringing you back to Seattle." Amara looked at him, unsure how to answer. She never talked about this place. Not really. Daniel nodded, sadness settling on his shoulders. "She missed it, but she missed you more." There was a pause. Amara took a breath, letting the silence settle between them. Then, finally, "What happens now?" Daniel didn't have an answer. He just looked at her, eyes full of regret and promise. "I don't know, but I want to be here, if you'll let me." That night, as Amara lay awake, her mind spun through every conversation, every silence, every question she still carried. She wrote in her journal, "Is it okay to want both? To love Mabel for raising me, to be angry at her for the secrets, to be curious about Daniel, to hate what he did, to hope he might still be good." She stared at the words, the ink bleeding slightly on the page. She thought about her mother, how many secrets she'd kept, how many truths she'd tried to protect Amara from. Maybe everyone in her life was just doing the best they could with what they had. But she wanted more. She wanted truth. She wanted someone to choose her, not out of guilt or duty, but out of love. She closed her eyes, feeling the ache of that longing. Tomorrow, she told herself, she'd ask harder questions. She'd demand real answers. But for tonight, she let herself believe that healing might be possible, even for families as fractured as hers. She drifted off, the rain still falling, Seattle's city lights blurring into gentle dreams. The return to the airport felt heavier than their arrival. Amara watched Seattle slip away through the car window, the Space Needle and mist-shrouded skyline receding into memory. Mabel sat beside her, clutching her purse tight in her lap. Daniel rode up front, next to Russell, who had arrived to escort them back home, his presence meant to provide support. But Amara suspected he was also there to monitor Daniel, to be the unofficial witness as new boundaries were drawn. At the airport, the sky was streaked with rain, but inside, the world bustled with fluorescent energy. There were lines, announcements, families arguing quietly in multiple languages, and Amara felt small in the river of travelers. She wondered as she followed Daniel and Mabel through security. If anyone passing by could guess the story unfurling in her own life, a girl between two families, between two cities, trying to stitch together the fragments of herself while everything kept shifting beneath her feet. Their flight was delayed, and the four of them waited at the gate, boxed in by their own uneasy silences. Daniel tried once to reach for Amara's hand, but withdrew when he caught the wary look Mabel gave him. Russell flipped through his phone, eyes darting up now and then, as if checking for emotional weather. Amara sat apart, headphones in, but no music playing. She needed the illusion of privacy, more than distraction. She watched people, a mother soothing a crying baby, two teenage boys wrestling over a bag of chips, an older man reading the sports section, tapping his foot. For a fleeting moment, she longed to be anyone but herself, to have a story that didn't feel so public and raw. Finally, boarding was called. First-class passengers, then families with children, then the rest. Daniel had upgraded their seats 2 rows in the premium cabin, an awkward luxury. Mabel and Amara took the window and aisle of row 4, with Daniel and Russell directly behind. The hum of the plane overhead, bins slamming, seat belts clicking, flight attendants reciting safety instructions was a comfort to Amara, a return to the contained chaos she understood. But as the doors closed and the engines whined, Amara's heart began to pound. She remembered the first flight, the turbulence, the fear, Daniel's collapse, and that terrible, miraculous moment she had realized who he was. Everything had changed in that cabin. What if it changed again? The plane pushed back from the gate. Rain streaked the windows. The runway lights blurred as they gathered speed, and then weightlessness, the soft shudder of takeoff, Seattle falling away. Amara pressed her forehead to the glass and watched the world shrink. At cruising altitude, Mabel tried to make small talk. "Would you like some juice?" "Baby," she asked. Amara shook her head. "Not hungry." Mabel hesitated, then said softly, "You don't have to talk, but if you want to about anything, I'm here." Amara nodded, not trusting her voice. She wanted to talk, but every time she tried, words turned to stones in her throat. Behind them, Daniel and Russell spoke in low tones. At one point, Daniel leaned forward, voice carrying just enough for Amara to hear. "Would you be okay if I switch seats for a little while?" Mabel gave him a long, hard look. "Only if Amara wants it." Amara stared at her hands, the choice feeling like another test. Part of her wanted to run. Part of her wanted to scream. But mostly, she wanted to stop feeling like a pawn in a game adults didn't know how to play. "Just for a little," she said quietly. "If it's okay with Grandma." Mabel's lips pressed tight, but she nodded, gathering her bag and moving to Daniel's seat behind. Daniel slid in beside Amara, his movements tentative. For several minutes, neither spoke. The cabin lights dimmed. The flight attendants rolled by with drinks, the clatter of ice and soda cans, and Amara wished for a distraction, any excuse to look away. But Daniel was patient. He sat with her in the quiet, letting the silence stretch. Finally, Amara broke it. "Did you ever want to be a dad?" she asked, surprising herself. Daniel exhaled, long and slow. "I did. I was just afraid. Afraid I'd mess up. Afraid I'd hurt you, or May, or myself." He looked down at his hands, twisting his wedding ring, a habit from another life. Amara bit her lip. It hurt, not knowing, not being chosen. All those birthdays, school events, just wishing you'd show up. Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes shining. "I can't change the past. Amara, I wish I could, but I can choose to show up now, if you'll let me." Amara felt anger and longing tangled inside her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself hope, but every promise sounded fragile at 35,000 feet. "Showing up is easy now that you know I'm yours," she said. "What about before, when you thought I was just someone else's kid?" Daniel closed his eyes, pained. That's not fair, but you're right. I was selfish. I let fear win, and you paid the price." They sat in the hush of the plane, broken only by the low thrum of engines. Suddenly, turbulence jolted the cabin. Trays rattled. A glass toppled somewhere behind. Amara's hand flew to the armrest. Daniel flinched, but forced himself to breathe. "Are you scared?" Amara whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel nodded. "Yes, but not of the plane. Of losing you before I even have a chance." Amara blinked, surprised by the rawness. She searched his face for a lie, but found only exhaustion. As the plane steadied, the captain's voice crackled overhead, reassuring everyone it was just a rough patch over the Rockies. Daniel and Amara exchanged a small, wary smile, an island of peace in a sea of turmoil. When the seatbelt sign went off, Mabel returned, Russell trailing after. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice careful. Daniel nodded, but Amara answered first. "We talked. It helped." "A little?" Russell bent down to Amara's level. "You did something brave, Amara. You faced it head on. Most grown folks don't do half as well." Amara looked at her grandmother, searching for approval, for some sign that she'd done the right thing. Mabel squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you, baby, no matter what." There was another pause, a pocket of calm. Amara realized she wasn't alone on this journey. Not really. Even as the plane crossed state lines, even as her family shifted beneath her, she carried their voices, their love, their flaws with her. Later, as the cabin darkened for night, Amara lay awake, tracing the shadowy outlines of the sleeping passengers. Her mind spun with questions. Would she ever feel at home with Daniel? Would her mother be proud of her now? Could she forgive Mabel for keeping secrets, or Russell for acting like everything would be okay when it so clearly wasn't? A flight attendant offered her a blanket, and Amara pulled it up to her chin. She watched Daniel sleep. His features softened, almost boyish in the glow from the window. She wondered what he dreamed about: regret, hope, a daughter he barely knew. She wrote in her journal, "Sometimes I think families are like airplanes, held together by pressure and hope and 1,000 unseen parts. We're all flying through storms, pretending not to be afraid, somewhere over the Midwest." The first blush of dawn touched the wing outside her window. Amara closed her eyes and let herself believe, just for a moment, that new beginnings were possible, even at altitude. When they landed, it was with less ceremony than she'd expected. No dramatic announcements, just the slow shuffle of passengers gathering bags, stretching limbs. Amara felt both lighter and heavier at once. She followed Daniel and Mabel through the jet bridge, blinking in the harsh terminal light. Outside baggage claim as Russell waved down a cab. Daniel touched Amara's shoulder. "This isn't the end," he said quietly. "I want to keep trying, Amara, however long it takes." Amara nodded, her heart racing. "Okay, but you have to keep showing up, not just say it." "I promise," Daniel said. For the first time, Amara allowed herself a small smile. Maybe families were just stories people kept telling each other, even after they broke. Maybe the act of telling and listening was enough to start healing. As the city rolled past on their way home, Amara stared out the window at a new day rising. She pressed her hand to the glass, feeling the cold seep into her skin, a reminder she was here, alive, part of a story still unfolding. She didn't know what would come next, but she was willing to find out. There's a strange stillness that settles over a plane in the middle of a night flight, a quiet that's almost holy. The overhead lights are dim, the engine hum becomes white noise, and only the occasional clatter of an ice bucket or the shuffle of a restless child reminds you you're hurtling across the sky at 600 miles an hour. For Amara, the stillness was anything but restful. It was a pause, a held breath, while the next wave of her life gathered strength to crash over her. She sat with her knees drawn up in her seat, blanket tucked to her chin. Outside, the stars glimmered in the velvet black. But her thoughts refused to settle. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of faces. Daniel, full of regret, Mabel, worried and fierce, Russell, patient and watching, even May, her late mother, hovering at the edge of memory, silent and beautiful. She missed her mother more fiercely in the dark. Not the sanitized version people remembered at church, but the real woman, soft and loud by turns, who left handwritten notes in lunchboxes and taught Amara how to braid her hair, who sometimes stared out windows for hours. Lost in sadness Amara didn't understand. May had felt like both shield and mystery, and now, with so much of the truth exposed, Amara wondered if she'd ever truly known her at all. The captain announced they'd be crossing a weather front soon. Flight attendants began to move quietly through the aisles, checking seatbelts, reminding people to store away their phones and tablets. Amara pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching the clouds stack up like a wall ahead. Just then, Daniel returned from the restroom, pausing at Amara's row. He looked tired, older than when she'd first met him. She saw the tremor in his hands, the way he hesitated before sitting back down. "Hey," he said, voice soft, so as not to wake Mabel, who had drifted into a doze. "Hi," Amara replied, hugging her knees tighter. A silence settled. Amara could feel the unspoken questions thick between them, heavier than the recycled air. "Finally," Daniel asked, "can I tell you a story?" Amara glanced over, surprised. She nodded, just once. He leaned back, staring up at the ceiling as if watching his own memory play out. "When I was a kid, my father used to take me flying. Small planes Cessnas. We'd go up over the Chesapeake, just him and me. I was always scared. I thought we'd fall out of the sky. But my father would say, 'You don't need to be brave to get on a plane. You just need to trust the wings.'" Amara turned the words over in her mind. "Did it help?" "Sometimes," Daniel said, lips quirking. "Other times I just gripped the seat and counted down the minutes until we'd landed. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I know how it feels to want the ride to be over, to want to be somewhere safe. But sometimes you find the strength to let go a little and just float." They sat quietly for a moment, the rhythm of the engines, a lullaby. Amara surprised herself by asking, "Did you ever tell my mom you were scared?" Daniel looked startled, then shook his head. "No. I was too proud. I didn't want her to see how unsure I was. She was. Your mother was a force. She made everything seem possible. I wish I'd told her more. I wish I'd been honest with her, with myself." Amara felt the ache of that truth. She wondered how many of the grown-ups in her life had been pretending, trying to protect her from their own broken pieces. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, a sharp dip that sent glasses rattling and passengers murmuring. Amara's breath caught. Daniel instinctively reached for her hand. She let him hold it, just for a moment. His palm was dry and warm, trembling slightly. "It's just weather," he said, more to himself than her. But in that moment, the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside the plane. As the turbulence passed and the cabin calmed, Russell appeared in the aisle, carrying 2 cups of tea from the galley. He offered one to Amara, who accepted gratefully, wrapping her hands around the paper cup. Mabel stirred, blinking awake. She took in the scene, Daniel and Amara close together, Russell hovering protectively. For a moment, the air between the adults grew tense, old resentments flaring in glances and unsaid words. Russell cleared his throat, taking the empty seat across the aisle. Looks like we're getting through the rough part, he said. Mabel nodded. Amara's always been strong. She'll weather this, too. Daniel looked at them both. She shouldn't have to be so strong all the time. Amara listened, a lump forming in her throat. The three adults talked as if she wasn't there, their voices careful, measured. But she could feel the guilt in Daniel's tone, the fierce protectiveness in Mabel's, the gentle steadiness in Russell's. For the first time, she wanted to say something to claim her own voice. "I don't want to be strong," Amara blurted. Her voice was small but clear. The adults turned, startled. She struggled for the words. "I just want everyone to stop fighting, to stop making me choose." A silence fell. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Russell, quietly, "You don't have to choose. Amara, not tonight, not ever, if you don't want to." Daniel nodded. "He's right. This is messy, but we'll figure it out together. I promise." Mabel reached over, tucking a stray braid behind Amara's ear. "We love you. That's what matters." Amara let their words settle, not entirely convinced, but comforted all the same. Hours passed. The plane moved eastward, chasing sunrise. Passengers slept or watched movies, read or whispered to seatmates. But the quiet in Amara's row was dense with unspoken hopes and fears. At some point, Daniel dozed off, his head lolling against the headrest. Mabel leaned back, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. Russell tapped Amara's shoulder. "You want to talk?" he whispered. She shrugged. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he said. "Sometimes it helps just to listen." So Amara listened to the engines, to the soft breathing of her family, to the pulse of her own heart. She thought about what it meant to belong, to be part of a story that wasn't simple or pretty, but was hers. She thought about her mother, how May had lived with secrets, had loved fiercely but imperfectly, how she'd tried to shield Amara from pain even when it meant causing more. She thought about Daniel, struggling to be a father now, after so many years lost. She thought about Mabel, who'd held the world together with grit and prayer. She thought about Russell, whose steadiness was an anchor, even in chaos. Amara's eyelids grew heavy. She drifted in and out of dreams, her mother's voice in the dark, Daniel's hand on hers, a house by the water where everyone she loved sat down to a meal, laughing, no secrets between them. She woke to the smell of breakfast plastic trays, eggs, sausage, orange juice. The cabin was brighter. People were stretching, yawning, prepping for landing. Mabel smiled at her, soft and tired. "Morning, baby. We'll be home soon." Daniel gave her a hopeful look. "Did you sleep okay?" Amara nodded, unsure how much was true. Her body felt heavy, but her mind was clear. As they descended, the seatbelt signs pinged, the flight attendants bustled, and passengers began to gather their things. Amara stared out the window at the city below, her city sunlight bouncing off row houses and church steeples. The moment felt fragile. She knew the real work would begin after landing, new routines, new boundaries, conversations with lawyers and therapists and teachers, the slow work of forging a family out of brokenness. But here, in this suspended moment, above the clouds, she allowed herself to hope. When the wheels touched down and the plane rolled to a stop, Amara squeezed Mabel's hand. "We made it," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Mabel squeezed back. "Yes, baby, we did." As they waited for the doors to open, Daniel leaned close. "Amara, can I call you later? Maybe we could get ice cream." She hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe, if Grandma says it's okay." He smiled, relief evident. "I'll wait for your call." Russell shouldered their bags. "Let's go home." Amara followed, feeling the weight of the journey, not just the flight, but everything before and everything still to come. She was tired, but she wasn't alone. And that, for now, was enough. The final hours of the flight were always the hardest. It was as if the air itself grew heavier, as if every unspoken word, every secret and hope, pressed down on Amara's chest. The sun had risen, painting gold along the airplane's windows, but inside, Amara felt caught between light and shadow. For the first time, the intercom fizzled with an edge of urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're approaching an area of increased turbulence. Please remain in your seats with seatbelts fastened." The calm, professional voice of the captain did little to calm the stirrings of anxiety now growing among the passengers. Coffee spilled. Overhead, bins rattled. A few small children whimpered, clutching at their parents. Amara drew in a steadying breath, trying to focus on the feeling of the seat beneath her, the texture of the blanket, the hum of her grandmother beside her. Across the aisle, Daniel Archer pressed his lips together, his knuckles whitening around the armrest. He caught Amara's eye and gave her a tense but encouraging nod. "Just a bit of wind, kiddo. We'll be fine." But even his reassurance couldn't reach the deeper turbulence inside Amara. She remembered his story from the night before about flying over the Chesapeake, about fear and trust. Was that what this was now? Not just a journey through the air, but a test of how much she could trust the wings beneath her and the people beside her. The plane shuddered again, sharper this time. There were startled gasps, and then an anxious hush. In the row ahead, a man's voice rose, tinged with panic. "Why aren't we descending? This isn't normal." A flight attendant hurried to reassure him, but the tension rippled backward, infecting other passengers. Amara felt her own hands begin to sweat. For a moment, she pressed her eyes shut and wished herself back in her grandmother's kitchen, somewhere solid, somewhere safe. But there was no escape. Not now. The only way out was through. Mabel reached for her granddaughter's hand. Her touch was gentle, but there was iron beneath it, a steadiness that had carried Amara through every storm so far. "We're okay," Mabel whispered, leaning close. "You just breathe. With me. Now. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale." It was a rhythm older than fear, older than pain, the rhythm of life passing down through mothers and daughters. Amara matched her breath to her grandmother's, letting it anchor her to the present. She became dimly aware of other voices. Russell, quietly reassuring an elderly woman in the row behind them. Daniel, murmuring to himself, the words indistinct, but the tone calm, almost pleading. As the plane rocked, Amara's thoughts spun faster. She thought of all she'd learned in the last day, the sudden revelation of Daniel's paternity, the storm of emotion still churning between them. She wanted to believe it could be simple, now wanted so badly for forgiveness to be as easy as saying, "I forgive you," for belonging to be as simple as sitting side by side. But it wasn't simple. The truth was messy, sharp-edged. She still carried anger, confusion, even resentment, not just at Daniel, but at her mother, for her silence, at her grandmother, for not telling her sooner, at herself, for sometimes wishing she could just go back to how things were before. She clung to Mabel's hand, searching for something steady inside herself. Suddenly, there was a commotion near the front of the cabin. Voices, too loud for a flight this early in the morning. "Sir, please return to your seat," a flight attendant said, her voice raised for the first time. Amara peered past the seats. A man, a tall, sharply dressed passenger from first class, was standing, gesturing wildly at the attendants. His voice carried, brittle with panic. "I demand to speak to the pilot. You people have no idea what you're doing. My company owns shares in this airline, and I will not tolerate." The attendant held her ground, but Amara could see the strain in her face. The whole cabin seemed to tighten, the panic at the front seeping backward. Passengers who'd been calm now whispered anxiously. Some pressed the call buttons, others glared or muttered into their phones, recording the chaos. Amara's breath hitched. She looked to Mabel, whose eyes were narrowed, sharp with both caution and defiance. Russell stood, half out of his seat, but caught Mabel's eye and sank back down. "This is just fear," he said softly, boiling over. Daniel stood as well, moving into the aisle, but only to make himself visible to the attendant, offering silent support. It was Russell, though, who spoke up, a quiet, even voice carrying through the tension. "Let the crew do their job. We're all in this together." The words didn't quell the chaos, but they cut through it, reminding everyone, just for a moment, of their shared vulnerability. Amara watched it all with a pounding heart, her own fears magnified by the grown-ups' inability to control what was happening. Was this what adulthood was, pretending to have the answers, even when you were just as lost? The commotion eventually subsided. The man was coaxed back to his seat by a stern but compassionate flight attendant, whose name tag read, Clarice. She paused as she passed Amara's row, offering a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "We're almost through the rough patch," she said quietly, as much to herself as anyone else. The plane steadied, the turbulence fading as quickly as it had come. Overhead, the fastened seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers exhaled as one, a collective relief. But Amara's mind wouldn't settle. She thought of the angry man at the front, how quickly fear had made him cruel, made him forget everyone else's humanity. She wondered what it would take for her to become like that, so consumed by her own terror that she lashed out at strangers. She didn't want to become that kind of adult. She didn't want to let pain twist her. A little while later, as the plane began its slow descent, Daniel returned to his seat beside Amara and Mabel. He looked tired, but there was a new humility in his eyes, a willingness to admit, finally, that he was not in control. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said softly. "It's not your fault," Amara replied. But Daniel shook his head. "I mean all of it. Not just today, but before, when I left, when I didn't fight hard enough to be in your life. I let fear win. I let the world tell me who I could and couldn't be, and who you could and couldn't be. I can't change the past, Amara, but I want you to know I see you now. I see all of you, and I am proud to be your father." Amara's throat tightened. There were 1,000 things she wanted to say, angry things, grateful things, confused things, but in that moment, all she could manage was a nod. She didn't have to forgive him, not yet, but she could let him try. Beside her, Mabel squeezed her hand, her own eyes suspiciously bright. The city came into view below block after block of rooftops, parks, and winding streets, home, everything familiar. And yet, after this flight, nothing would ever be quite the same. The final announcements crackled over the speakers. Flight attendants made their last pass through the cabin, collecting trash, straightening up, giving passengers tight, professional smiles. Russell leaned across the aisle, his voice low. "No matter what happens after we land, you've done something remarkable. Amara, you've found the courage to face the truth." Mabel nodded. "And you've reminded us what matters: kindness, family, showing up even when it's hard." Amara stared at her hands. They were small, but they were hers, capable, strong. She thought of her mother's hands, her grandmother's, and, for the first time, wondered about her father's hands, too. She thought of the wings that held them all, carrying their secrets and their hopes through the sky. The wheels touched down, bumping, then racing along the runway. The plane slowed, then stopped. A new silence descended, not the tense quiet of fear, but the hush of arrival. Amara unbuckled her seatbelt, heart pounding. She reached for her grandmother's hand, and together, they waited for the doors to open, for the next chapter to begin. For the first time since the flight began, she felt a sense of anticipation, not just dread, but hope. As the cabin doors opened and sunlight spilled in, Amara stepped into the aisle. She carried with her the knowledge of who she was and the promise, still uncertain but real, of what she might yet become. When the cabin door finally swung open, a wave of warm, earth-scented air flooded the aisle. Amara blinked as sunlight streamed through, illuminating the line of passengers shuffling forward with a mix of exhaustion, relief, and quiet anticipation. It was strange, she thought, how quickly the world outside could remind you of its ordinary rhythm, even after everything that had happened inside the plane. Mabel squeezed Amara's shoulder gently. "You ready, love?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Amara nodded. "I think so," she whispered, though a part of her wasn't sure what ready meant anymore. Ready for what? For new truths? For changed relationships? For a future she couldn't quite picture? They gathered their bags, Amara's faded blue backpack, and the old leather duffel that had belonged to her mother, and waited their turn in the crowded aisle. Daniel stood behind them, hands in his pockets, looking more nervous now than he had at any point during the flight. His eyes kept darting from Amara to the window and back, as if searching for some invisible sign that would tell him what to do next. Russell joined them, his tall frame slightly stooped, eyes soft with concern. "You two head out first," he said quietly. "I'll be right behind you. No rush." The line moved forward, inch by inch. Passengers murmured soft goodbyes, some with awkward smiles, others already absorbed in their phones. Amara caught the eye of Clarice, the flight attendant, who gave her a subtle nod and a look that said, "You made it," stepping over the threshold onto the jet bridge. Amara felt the thrum of the airport beneath her feet, a new kind of turbulence, this time in her chest. Her senses sharpened the heavy scent of coffee and cleaning supplies, the echo of footsteps, the distant rumble of suitcases on wheels. It was all so normal, but nothing inside her felt normal. As they moved toward baggage claim, Amara realized her palms were slick with sweat. Her mind darted from one worry to another. Would anyone be waiting for them? What would she say if someone asked about the man who'd flown beside her? What would happen now? With Daniel? With her grandmother? The airport was bustling with summer travelers, parents corralling kids, business people marching with purpose, couples squabbling over directions. Amara felt invisible in the crowd, her story both monumental and utterly hidden among 1,000 small dramas unfolding around her. Daniel walked a little behind, giving her space. Amara wondered if he felt like an outsider in his own life, the way she did now. She glanced back once and saw the longing in his eyes, a longing that felt familiar, echoing something she recognized in herself. At baggage claim, Mabel found a seat and motioned for Amara to join her. Daniel stood awkwardly nearby, waiting for the conveyor belt to start up. The air hummed with background noise announcements, laughter, the beep of carts in reverse. Russell arrived, his presence grounding. "I called ahead," he said quietly. "Cars waiting outside. We'll be home soon." Home. The word landed heavily in Amara's mind. Home was safe, but home was also where the new reality had to be faced. She wondered if her room would feel different now, if the books on her shelf would look back at her with new eyes. She bit her lip, hugging her knees to her chest. "Grandma," she whispered. "What do I do now?" Mabel took her hand. You breathe, honey. You take it one step at a time. We'll talk. We'll listen to each other. And we'll figure out what comes next together. You're not alone." Amara nodded, but her thoughts continued to swirl. She wondered if it was possible to feel both more connected and more alone than ever before. When their bags finally arrived, Daniel lifted them down, placing Amara's gently at her feet. "Thank you," she said, surprising herself with how natural the words sounded. He smiled, tentative but grateful. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "We could get something to eat if you want, or I can just call you later. I don't want to make this harder than it has to be." Amara hesitated, feeling the eyes of both adults on her. What did she want? Her heart ached with conflicting feelings, curiosity, resentment, a flicker of hope. Maybe not today," she said quietly, eyes on the ground. "But you can call. I'd like that." Daniel's shoulders dropped in relief, and he nodded. "I will. No pressure. I just want to know you, whenever you're ready." The simplicity of the offer, no demands, no expectations, soothed something raw in Amara. For the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward with this man who was both a stranger and her father. They made their way through the glass doors to the pickup lane, the heat a shock after the cold air of the plane. Russell's car was waiting, and he loaded their bags into the trunk. As Mabel and Amara climbed into the back seat, Daniel hovered on the curb, uncertain. He tapped the roof of the car lightly, meeting Amara's gaze through the glass. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said, voice low but steady. "Take care." "Amara, bye." "Daniel," she replied, using his first name deliberately. It felt strange, but right, not Dad. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But Daniel. He nodded, stepped back, and watched as they pulled away. The sight of him growing smaller in the rearview mirror was both a relief and a loss. Amara rested her head on Mabel's shoulder, letting herself breathe for the first time in hours. The drive home was quiet. Russell hummed softly to the radio, a jazz station crackling through the speakers. Amara watched the city blur by, old row houses and corner stores, kids on bikes, dogs barking at passing cars. It was her city, imperfect and alive. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds and smells wash over her. She thought of the flight, of everything said and unsaid, and felt the knot in her stomach begin to loosen. Mabel stroked her hair gently. "You did good, baby," she murmured. "You did brave." Amara didn't answer, but the words soaked in. She'd been brave. Yes, but she was also tired. So tired. When they arrived home, the sun was high in the sky, baking the pavement. The air was thick with summer smells, cut grass, barbecue smoke, the faint tang of diesel from the city bus passing by. Their neighbor, Mrs. Carpenter, was outside sweeping her porch. She called out, "Welcome back," sugar as they climbed the steps. Amara managed to smile, grateful for the normalcy. Inside, the house was cool and dark, full of familiar shadows. Amara dropped her bag by the door, took off her shoes, and stood in the hallway, listening to the creaks and sighs of the old house. Mabel opened a window, letting in a breeze. "Go on up and wash up. Amara, I'll fix you something to eat." Amara obeyed, her legs suddenly heavy. In the bathroom, she stared at herself in the mirror. She looked the same dark eyes, same braid, same birthmark on her jaw, but something had changed behind her eyes. She was still herself, but she carried more now. More story, more history, more questions. Downstairs, the kitchen clattered with the sounds of Mabel making lunch. The scent of frying onions drifted up the stairs, mingling with the distant shouts of kids playing in the alley. Amara changed into clean clothes, splashed cold water on her face, and tried to gather her thoughts. There was so much she wanted to say, but the words tangled in her chest. At the kitchen table, Mabel set down a plate of eggs and toast. Amara picked at her food, appetite dulled by exhaustion. "Want to talk about it?" Mabel asked, settling across from her. Amara nodded, but didn't speak at first. She stared at her hands, flexing her fingers. "Do you think he really means it?" she whispered. "That he wants to be in my life?" Mabel considered the question. "I think he's trying. People can change, honey. Sometimes it takes them a long time, but they can. Doesn't mean you have to rush. You decide the pace. You decide what feels right." Amara nodded, biting her lip. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared he'll disappear again, or that I'll let him in and get hurt, or that I'll turn into someone I don't like." Mabel reached across the table, covering Amara's hand with her own. "You're not alone in this. Whatever you feel, anger, hope, even love, there's room for all of it. You're allowed to be scared, but you don't have to be scared alone." That night, as Amara lay in bed listening to the sounds of the city outside her window, she replayed the flight in her mind, the turbulence, the argument, the confessions. She thought of Daniel's face, hopeful and unsure. She thought of her grandmother's arms, always steady. She realized she was at the beginning of something new, not just a new relationship, but a new understanding of herself. Maybe family wasn't something you inherited, she thought. Maybe it was something you built, moment by moment, with honesty and courage and forgiveness. Maybe it was okay not to have all the answers. As she drifted off to sleep, Amara felt the old ache in her chest, but also a new kind of hope. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more conversations, maybe even more pain. But it would also bring another chance, a chance to take another step, to try again, to keep moving forward. And that, she decided, was enough for now. The days after the flight passed with a strange, dreamlike quality. For Amara, returning home was both a comfort and a challenge. On the surface, life resumed its old rhythm school in the mornings, homework at the kitchen table, Grandma's gentle presence filling every room of the house. Yet beneath that familiar surface, everything had changed. She found herself moving through each day as if she were split in two. On the outside, she was the same Amara who had left for Los Angeles, quiet, thoughtful, reliable. The girl who always turned in her homework on time, who never caused trouble in class. But inside, she carried the echo of the sky, the roar of the engines, the crash of the storm, the trembling voice of the man who had once been a ghost and was now flesh and blood. It was a peculiar thing, this new duality. Sometimes, as she sat in math class and watched the teacher solve equations on the board, she would suddenly remember the way Daniel had looked at her on the plane, so uncertain, so hopeful. Other times, when her friends joked in the lunchroom about whose parents were the most embarrassing, she would feel a sharp, private ache, a reminder that her own story was far messier than anyone guessed. She hadn't told anyone at school about Daniel. She wasn't sure she ever would. It wasn't shame that kept her silent, but a sense that the words were too heavy, too complicated to share with kids whose biggest worry was whether they'd make the basketball team or pass the next spelling test. Her secret was like a small, heavy stone in her pocket, always there, sometimes unnoticed, sometimes sharp against her skin. In the evenings, Amara often sat at her window, looking out over the rooftops of Baltimore. The city was alive with its usual chorus sirens in the distance, the rumble of cars, the barking of dogs. She would rest her chin on her knees and wonder about Daniel. Was he sitting in his apartment, thinking of her? Was he writing her a letter, or just staring at his phone, afraid to press call? The first letter arrived 3 days after the flight. It came by regular mail, the envelope addressed in a neat, careful hand. Amara saw it on the hallway table when she got home from school. She stared at the unfamiliar handwriting for a long time before she picked it up. Grandma Mabel watched her, saying nothing. There was no pressure in her eyes, only quiet support. In her room. Amara opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in half. The letter was short, the words spare but sincere. Dear Amara, I hope you're settling back in at home. I've been thinking about you a lot, about what I said, about what I didn't say, about how much I have to learn. I want to write because sometimes it's easier to put things on paper than to say them out loud. I know I have no right to expect anything from you. I only want you to know that I care and that I'm here in whatever way you need. I'm sending you my phone number. You can call or text any time or not at all. If you'd rather not, this is your choice. I'll write again soon. Take care. Daniel Amara read the letter 3 times, trying to hear his voice in the rhythm of the words. She folded the paper carefully and slipped it under her pillow, as if keeping it close would somehow make the choice easier. She didn't answer right away. For days, she let the letter rest, returning to it in the quiet moments before sleep. What did she want? What did she need? The questions churned inside her, refusing easy answers. At school, her teachers commented on her quietness. Everything all right? Amara misses, Sanders asked one afternoon as the last bell rang and the classroom emptied. I'm fine, Amara replied, forcing a smile. Just tired. She supposed it was true in a way she couldn't explain. Tired from the journey, tired from the emotional weight she carried. At recess, she sometimes drifted away from her friends, sitting on the swings and letting her thoughts wander. Tanya, her closest friend since 3rd grade, noticed the change. You seem different, Tanya said one day, swinging back and forth beside her. Is something wrong? Amara shook her head. Not wrong, just a lot on my mind. Tanya waited a beat, then let it go, knowing Amara well enough to sense when pushing wouldn't help. They sat in silence, the chains of the swings creaking, the world spinning gently around them. A week after the letter arrived, Amara finally picked up her phone and sent a text to the number Daniel had written. Hi, it's Amara. I got your letter. Thank you. She stared at the screen, unsure if she should say more. In the end, she hit send and put the phone face down on her desk, heart pounding. His reply came an hour later. Thank you for writing. I'm glad you're okay. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No rush. It was a small exchange, but it felt enormous. A door had opened a small crack, perhaps, but enough to let the air in. That night, she told Grandma Mabel. I wrote him back, she said quietly, sitting at the kitchen table while her grandmother chopped onions for dinner. Mabel nodded, not looking up from her work. How did it feel? Amara considered the question. Scary, but kind of good, too. Brave, Mabel said, sliding the onions into the pan. You're brave, Amara. Amara didn't feel brave, but the words warmed her, the way a blanket does on a cold night. Days turned into weeks. Amara and Daniel exchanged more messages, always careful, always tentative. Sometimes he sent a picture of something he'd seen, a bookshop he'd found, the first cherry blossoms in the park near his apartment, a cat sunning itself on a windowsill. Amara replied with details from her own life, a drawing she'd made, her science fair project, a joke Tanya had told at lunch. They were small things, but they formed a thread between them, delicate but growing stronger with each exchange. Still, Amara struggled with uncertainty. Some nights, she lay awake, wondering if she was doing the right thing. Was it possible to build something real with a man who had been absent for so long? Was she betraying James's memory, the man who had raised her, who had chosen her by letting Daniel in, even a little? She talked about these worries with Mabel, who listened quietly, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "It's not either or," Mabel said gently. "Loving James doesn't mean you can't be curious about Daniel. Your heart's big enough for both. And you're allowed to take your time." Amara nodded, but the doubts lingered. Every message from Daniel felt like a step across a bridge that might not hold her weight. One afternoon in late October, Daniel called. Amara stared at the phone as it buzzed. The contact labeled simply Daniel Archer. Her hand shook as she answered. "Hello, hi, Amara." His voice was softer than she remembered, tentative. They talked for 5 minutes about nothing and everything. He asked about school, about her friends, about her grandmother's health. Amara answered in short sentences, her voice clipped with nerves. When the call ended, she realized she was smiling. After that, the calls became a weekly ritual. Sometimes they lasted only a few minutes, sometimes longer. The more they talked, the easier it became. Not easy exactly, but possible. Autumn settled over Baltimore, painting the city in gold and rust. Amara's world was changing, but so were the seasons, and something about that felt right. One Saturday, Daniel surprised her by asking if she wanted to meet in person someplace public, just for lunch. He said he'd be in town for work and would understand if she said no. Amara agonized over the decision. She talked it over with Mabel, who insisted the choice was hers. "You decide if you're ready," she said. "Whatever you need, I'll be right there." In the end, Amara agreed. They met at a small cafe near the harbor. Daniel arrived early, looking nervous but happy. He had brought her a book, a graphic novel about a girl who loved the stars. Over sandwiches and lemonade, they talked. Daniel told her about his work, about his childhood, about the mistakes he'd made and the regrets he carried. Amara listened, sometimes silent, sometimes asking questions. At one point, she asked, "Why did you leave?" The words trembled on her tongue. Daniel looked down, twisting his napkin in his hands. "I was scared," he admitted. "I was selfish. I thought it would be easier for everyone if I stayed away. I see now how wrong I was. I can't change the past, Amara. I wish I could, but I can be here now, if you'll let me." Amara said nothing, but her silence wasn't rejection. It was the silence of someone listening, someone weighing the truth. They parted with an awkward hug. Daniel promised to write, and Amara believed him. That night, Amara lay awake, the book Daniel had given her open on her lap. She traced the illustrations with her finger, thinking about the story about a girl who traveled through darkness, always searching for the light. She thought about James, about Daniel, about Mabel. She thought about herself, the journey she was on, the questions that still had no answers. She wasn't sure what the future would hold or how her story would end. But for the first time since the flight, she felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she could build something new from the pieces of her past. As sleep claimed her, Amara dreamed of open skies, of letters sent across the distance, of voices calling her home. The air in Baltimore changed as November gave way to December. The nights grew longer and colder, the city wrapped itself in scarves and heavy coats, and lights blossomed in the windows of row houses up and down Amara's street. The first snow arrived quietly one evening, a thin, tentative dusting that coated the steps and garden fences in a soft veil of white. For Amara, the turn of the year always brought a jumble of feelings. She loved the brightness and bustle of the season, the smell of cinnamon and baking bread in the kitchen, the rustle of wrapping paper, the way Grandma Mabel would hum along with old carols as she decorated their tiny tree. But this year, the anticipation was knotted with uncertainty. The events of the past months had shifted everything she thought she knew about family, and the holiday season seemed to cast those changes in sharper relief. On the surface, life in their small home was much the same. Mabel, ever resourceful, managed to conjure warmth and celebration from very little. Their tree, no taller than Amara's chest, sparkled with a mismatched collection of ornaments, some inherited, some made by Amara in school over the years, a few fashioned from string and buttons when money was tight. Amara strung popcorn and cranberries to drape along the windowsills, her fingers sticky with sap and sugar. Yet the rituals carried new weight. Each ornament Amara placed on the tree brought a memory her mother's laughter in distant years, her father, James's patient hands guiding her through the knot of a ribbon. Now, with both those figures distant, one lost to death, the other to illness, their absence felt deeper than ever, like a shadow at the edge of the holiday's glow. One afternoon, as the first snow still clung to the branches outside, Amara came home to find a padded envelope on the kitchen table. Daniel's handwriting was there, neat and careful, but a little less stiff than before. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a card with a watercolor painting of winter trees and a letter folded around a small, wrapped box. Dear Amara, I don't want to intrude on your holidays, but I wanted you to have this. It belonged to my mother, your grandmother. She wore it every winter, and it brought her comfort. I thought you might like to have something of hers, if you want it. If not, that's perfectly okay. I hope you and Mabel have a peaceful season. I'll be thinking of you. Daniel, inside the box, was a simple silver pendant shaped like a snowflake. It was cool and heavy in her palm. Amara ran her thumb over the delicate points, thinking about this woman she'd never met, Daniel's mother, a stranger, and yet, by blood, her grandmother. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to feel. Gratitude connection. All she knew was a complex tangle of warmth and discomfort, as if the gift was a thread pulling her gently toward a new, uncertain family she hadn't chosen, but couldn't ignore. She carried the pendant upstairs and placed it beside her locket, where the pictures of her mother and James smiled out from behind their glass window. 3 strands of her history, side by side, each one complicated, incomplete, but undeniably hers. The next day, Amara wore the pendant to school. It was a quiet act, but somehow it gave her strength. She touched it absently as she walked through the halls, her thoughts a river of conflicting feelings, loyalty to James, who would always be her father in the ways that mattered, love for her mother. Now only a voice on the phone and a face in memory, curiosity and apprehension about Daniel, the man who had given her the shape of her eyes and the timbre of her voice. Her best friend Tanya noticed. That's new, she said, eyeing the pendant as they sat together at lunch. It's pretty. Amara smiled, twisting the chain between her fingers. A gift from someone in my family, she said, choosing her words with care. It used to belong to his mother. Tanya nodded, accepting the vague explanation. She knew better than to press for details Amara wasn't ready to share. The lunchroom was filled with chatter about holiday plans, who was visiting, which relatives, whose parents were arguing about travel, what gifts everyone hoped to find under their trees. Amara listened, the talk swirling around her, feeling at once included and set apart by the secrets she carried. As winter break approached, Amara found herself yearning for the comfort of old traditions, the security of the routines she'd shared with James and Mabel. On the last day of school, her class held a secret Santa exchange. Amara's gift, a book about constellations, came with a hand-drawn card from Tanya. "You're my star. Love. T." She grinned, feeling the warm surge of connection that had anchored her through the hardest months. She wasn't alone, even if her family was fractured and strange. There were people who loved her, people who showed up. At home, Amara and Mabel prepared for the holiday in their usual way. They baked gingerbread, their small kitchen filling with the smell of spices and sugar. Mabel taught Amara how to make her mother's favorite cranberry sauce, letting her stir the pot until the berries burst. One evening, as they decorated cookies, Amara asked a question she'd been turning over for weeks. "Grandma, do you miss Papa James more at Christmas?" Mabel paused, the icing bag still in her hand. "I miss him every day, baby. But yes, the holidays bring it back sharper. We had some hard years, but he always made this time special. He loved you so much. Amara, never forget that." "I won't," Amara promised, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I think about him a lot. I wish he could see me now." "He does, in his way," Mabel said quietly, pressing a gentle hand to Amara's shoulder. "He's part of you, always." They finished the cookies in silence, a peace settling between them, a peace born not from certainty, but from shared love and memory. A few days before Christmas, Daniel called. Amara answered, sitting on her bed and twisting the snowflake pendant between her fingers. "Hey," he said, his voice tinny through the speaker. "I just wanted to say Happy Holidays. I hope you're okay." "I am," Amara replied. "Thank you for the necklace. It's pretty. I'm glad you like it. It was my mom's. She would have loved to meet you." Amara hesitated, unsure how to bridge the gulf between them. There were so many things she wanted to ask, so many feelings she hadn't sorted out. In the end, she settled for honesty. "It's strange, having something from someone I never met, but thank you." Daniel seemed to understand. "Strange is okay," he said gently. "I know this isn't easy. I'm proud of you, Amara, for everything." His words caught her off guard. She wasn't used to being told she was brave or strong or deserving of pride. Those words belonged to heroes in books, not quiet girls from Baltimore trying to knit their lives back together. Still, the compliment lingered in her heart, warming her as she hung up and joined Mabel in the living room. On Christmas morning, the world outside was silent and white. Amara and Mabel exchanged small gift socks, a new notebook, a pair of gloves. They ate pancakes by the window, watching the city wake beneath a thin layer of snow. Later, they bundled up and delivered plates of food to neighbors. Miss Lila down the street was alone this year, and Mr. Green, the church deacon, had lost his wife in the spring. Amara carried the plates carefully, her breath turning to fog in the air, her heart full of gratitude and melancholy. In the afternoon, Tanya came over with her mother. They drank cocoa and played board games, their laughter echoing in the tiny living room. For a few hours, the troubles of the past year receded, replaced by the simple, stubborn joy of being together. That night, as the city lay blanketed in snow, Amara sat at her window, looking up at the sky. The pendant lay cool against her skin. She thought about her strange, sprawling family, the people who had shaped her, the ones she had lost, and the ones she was only just beginning to know. A part of her still ached for what was gone. She missed James's steady hands, her mother's laughter, the sense of certainty she'd once taken for granted. But as the stars shone through the cold, clear air, Amara felt something else hope that she could carry all these pieces, the old and the new, the joyful and the painful, into the future. Hope that, with time and care, She could build a life that honored everyone she loved, without losing herself in the process. She closed her eyes and made a wish not for things to go back to the way they were, but for the strength to embrace what was coming, for the courage to be both the girl she'd always been and the young woman she was becoming. As the city slept, Amara felt the quiet power of her own heart beating steady and true beneath the weight of memory and possibility. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges and gifts, for tonight she was home, held by love, and ready for whatever lay ahead. The new year arrived not with fanfare, but with a hush. Snow still clung to the eaves and tree branches outside Amara's window, but the holidays had slipped past in a blur of visits, cocoa, and conversations that lingered in her mind long after the gifts were put away. January in Baltimore was a season of gray mornings, frozen puddles, and the muffled thump of snowplows scraping the streets. But for Amara, this year, it also meant something new, a trip by plane, her very first flight alone. Daniel had called in early December with the idea. "There's a mentorship program for girls interested in science and engineering," he'd said, his tone more tentative than usual. "It's hosted by one of my friends in Chicago. Just a weekend. You'd stay with the other girls at the hotel, and I'd be nearby if you needed anything. I thought you might enjoy it, but only if you want to." Amara, no pressure. The thought of leaving Baltimore, of crossing time zones and sitting in a plane seat without Grandma Mabel's steady presence beside her, filled Amara with both excitement and dread. She wanted to say yes, to see new places, to meet other girls who loved numbers and patterns as much as she did. But what if she got lost in the airport? What if something happened on the plane? What if she wasn't brave enough? After all, she told Daniel she needed to think about it. For days. She mulled the decision in silence. At night, lying in bed with the silver snowflake pendant cold against her throat, she imagined herself boarding the plane, finding her seat, buckling her belt. She saw herself at 30,000 feet, alone but not lonely, her future spread out like the lights of a city below. In the end, it was Mabel who gave her the final nudge. "You'll never know what you can do until you try, baby," she said, folding an extra pair of socks into Amara's small suitcase. "I'll be right here when you get back. Besides, you're stronger than you think." On a freezing Friday morning, with snow swirling in the air, Amara and Mabel took a taxi to the airport. Mabel insisted on coming all the way to the security checkpoint, fussing over Amara's coat, her hat, the lunch she'd packed in a brown paper bag. "Call me as soon as you land," she said, her voice a blend of pride and worry. Amara squeezed her grandmother tight, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and home. "I will, I promise." The airport was a world of its own, echoing and bright, filled with people rushing in every direction. Amara clutched her backpack and followed the signs for her gate, her heart pounding like the engines she would soon be trusting with her life. She found her seat by the window, buckled her belt, and placed her hand on the pendant at her throat. The plane was full of strangers, a man in a suit typing frantically on his laptop, a mother soothing a wailing baby, two teenage girls whispering behind their hands. Amara felt invisible and exposed all at once, as if every passenger could sense that she was traveling alone for the first time. The flight attendant, a black woman with kind eyes, stopped by her row. "First time flying solo?" she asked, her smile reassuring. Amara nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The woman winked. "You're doing just fine. If you need anything, just press that button right there. We'll take good care of you." The plane taxied, then lurched forward, gathering speed. As the ground dropped away and the city shrank beneath her, Amara gripped the armrests, willing herself not to cry or panic. She focused on the steady thrum of the engines, the rhythmic instructions of the captain, the smooth ascent into the clouds. Outside her window, the world became nothing but white and blue. For the first time in months, Amara felt her anxiety fall away, replaced by something lighter, almost buoyant, a sense of possibility, of the future stretching out before her like the horizon itself. Somewhere over Ohio, the turbulence began. At first it was just a gentle rocking, like the porch swing on a breezy night. Then, suddenly, the plane jolted, pitching sideways. A gasp rippled through the cabin. Amara's heart leapt into her throat, her fingers digging into the armrests. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some mild turbulence. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. We'll be through this in just a few minutes." The passengers around Amara exchanged nervous glances. The teenage girls giggled, pretending not to be afraid. The businessman closed his laptop, jaw set tight. Amara closed her eyes. She thought of Mabel's steady hands, of James's gentle voice telling her stories about the constellations, of her mother's laughter on rare good days. She focused on her breath, in, out, slow, and steady. A memory surfaced, sudden and vivid, the moment on the plane with Daniel, months ago, when she had saved his life without knowing he was her father. The fear then had been sharper, more immediate, but she had acted even through her fear. She opened her eyes and looked around. The world was still there. The flight attendant walked down the aisle, her presence a quiet reassurance. Amara felt the fear recede, replaced by something fiercer pride. She could do hard things. She could survive turbulence, literal and otherwise. The rest of the flight passed in a dreamlike haze. Amara pressed her forehead to the window, watching the clouds shift and part, the ground reappearing in quilted patterns of snow and fields. When the plane landed in Chicago, the applause from the passengers was half relief, half celebration. Amara grinned, unbuckling her seatbelt and gathering her things. Her legs trembled as she walked off the plane, but she held her head high. At baggage claim, she spotted Daniel waiting by the carousel, looking both anxious and proud. He wore a navy coat and a scarf, and his hair was dusted with snow from outside. Amara hesitated, unsure whether to wave, to call out, to run into his arms like a daughter, or keep her distance like a cautious friend. Daniel seemed to sense her uncertainty. He offered a small, careful smile. "Hey, superstar," he said as she approached. "How was your flight?" She shrugged, summoning a smile of her own. "There was turbulence. I was scared. But I made it." Daniel's eyes softened. "I knew you would. Welcome to Chicago, Amara." The weekend passed in a flurry of activity. The mentorship program was held in a sprawling hotel conference center, filled with girls from all over the country. There were workshops on robotics and coding, hands-on experiments with circuits and chemical reactions, and group projects that pushed Amara to speak up in front of strangers. For the first time in her life, Amara found herself surrounded by girls who shared her interests, who debated math problems for fun, who stayed late in the lab to finish a project, who spoke about their dreams of becoming scientists and engineers without apology. She made friends with a girl named Jasmine, who was from Detroit and loved astronomy as much as Amara did. They spent an evening in the hotel lounge, talking about black holes and string theory, their laughter rising above the clatter of dishes and silverware. Yet, each night in her hotel bed, Amara lay awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to the distant hum of elevators. The thrill of the day gave way to old doubts. Did she belong here? Was she just pretending to be brave and smart? Would she ever feel truly at home in any world? Her family's, Daniel's, or this new universe of girls and dreams? She texted Mabel before falling asleep each night. "Miss you. I'm okay. Love you. Proud of you. Baby." Call me if you need anything. You're never alone. Her grandmother's words, as always, helped steady her heart. On the final night, there was a banquet for the girls and their families. Daniel attended, lingering at the edge of the room, careful not to intrude. When Amara's group presented their project, a model of a Mars rover she'd helped design, she caught his eye in the audience and saw tears glimmering there. Afterward, as the ballroom emptied, Daniel approached. "You did incredible, Amara. Your presentation was clear and confident. I hope you know how proud I am." Amara looked down, kicking at the carpet. "It's easier with strangers. Sometimes it's harder at home." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I get that. I never felt like I belonged in my own skin. Not for a long time. It took me years to realize you can build belonging, bit by bit, day by day, even when it feels impossible." She met his gaze, her voice quiet but strong. "I want to try. To belong. To figure out where I fit." Daniel smiled. "A real one this time. We'll figure it out together, however long it takes." As Amara rode the elevator back to her room that night, she felt a quiet sense of victory. The flight home would still be daunting, and life in Baltimore would bring its old complexities, but she had crossed a threshold. She was not the same girl who had left home trembling with uncertainty. She was someone who could face turbulence and find her way through, both in the sky and in her own heart. The trip home from Chicago began with the easy optimism of accomplishment. Amara had done what once felt impossible. She had flown alone, found friendship among strangers, spoken her truth out loud. On Sunday morning, Daniel walked her to the airport gate, a steadying presence in the churning tide of travelers. His hug was careful but real. And this time, when he said, "Call me if you need anything, any time," Amara didn't doubt his sincerity. The plane was smaller than the one she'd taken to Chicago, and the January weather brought its own complications, delays, freezing rain, and a certain restlessness in the crowded gate area. Amara found herself assigned to a middle seat in the 12th row, hemmed in by two adults, an older woman in a quilted jacket on her left and a man in a business suit on her right, both so absorbed in their phones they barely glanced at her. She buckled herself in, stashed her backpack at her feet, and stared out the window, past her seatmates' elbows, trying to summon the bravery she'd built over the weekend. The flight attendants made their rounds, smiles polite but distracted, and, after the familiar rituals of safety announcements and checks, the plane taxied out into the sleet. As the engines thundered and the ground began to fall away, Amara pressed her hand to her pendant, breathing in and out, remembering Jasmine's whispered encouragement from the night before, "We belong here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." For the first hour, the flight was unremarkable, just the low hum of engines and the gentle clink of drink carts rolling by. The older woman beside Amara knitted, lips pursed in concentration. The businessman read reports on a tablet, his face impassive. Amara read a dog-eared copy of A Wrinkle in Time and drifted in and out of the story, lulled by the monotony and the familiar comfort of fiction. But after the flight attendants collected the trash, the mood in the cabin changed. A raised voice, sharp and unmistakable, cut through the drone. "I'm telling you, this is my seat." A tall, well-dressed white man in his 40s stood in the aisle, waving his boarding pass at a black woman and her daughter seated several rows ahead of Amara. The woman, dignified and calm, replied, "Sir, this is the seat printed on my boarding pass." The attendant hurried over, her face tensing into a corporate smile. "Let's just take a look, sir, ma'am. No need for raised voices." Passengers craned their necks, curiosity and discomfort rippling through the rows like static. Amara felt her stomach tighten. She watched as the man's voice grew louder, his gestures more aggressive, until the attendant finally asked him to step into the galley for privacy. He complied, but not before hissing, "Some people don't know their place." A sick, familiar heat crept up Amara's neck. She recognized the look on the faces of the black woman and her daughter, the tightly controlled dignity, the refusal to show fear or anger. Amara remembered her grandmother telling her, "Sometimes surviving means swallowing your pride, baby, but don't ever forget who you are." The incident resolved quietly. The man relocated to a different seat, but the unease remained a sharp, invisible line drawn in the pressurized air. As the flight progressed, the tension never fully dissipated. The white businessman next to Amara scrolled through news stories about airline discrimination. He muttered, "People get so sensitive these days," not bothering to lower his voice. The older woman beside Amara clicked her tongue disapprovingly, but said nothing. Amara sat very still, her hands clenched in her lap. She wanted to disappear, to become invisible, but she also felt the old stubborn flame ignite within her, the one that made her stand up for Tanya at school. That drove her to speak up in the mentorship sessions when others talked over her. At that moment, the flight attendant stopped by their row. She crouched down to Amara's level, her expression gentle but weary. "You doing okay?" Honey, Amara nodded. "I'm fine." But her voice was thinner than she intended. The attendant lingered, searching Amara's face. "If you need anything, you press that button. All right. Anything at all." As the woman moved away, Amara blinked back tears she hadn't expected. The need for composure warred with the urge to cry, to let out all the pent-up fear and anger and longing for safety. She closed her eyes and imagined her grandmother's arms around her. Halfway through the flight, the turbulence began not from the weather, but from within the cabin itself. The businessman next to Amara leaned over suddenly. "You're one of those scholarship kids, aren't you?" Amara flinched. What I saw your badge at the airport, one of those programs for disadvantaged youth. It's good they give you opportunities. Just remember to be grateful. Okay." Amara's cheeks burned. She looked away, searching for words that wouldn't come. She wanted to disappear, or better, to be someone else, someone who could clap back with the perfect retort. She felt the old shame crawl over her skin. She thought of Jasmine in Chicago, who had said, "Never let them define you. You belong." The older woman beside her spoke up, voice quivering with anger. "She doesn't owe you anything, sir. Mind your own business." For a moment, Amara looked at her, surprised, then grateful. The businessman shrugged, unconcerned, and went back to his tablet. But the woman reached over, patting Amara's hand. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." The rest of the flight passed in strained silence. Amara sat rigid in her seat, heart pounding, her thoughts a tangled mess of anger, hurt, and exhaustion. When the plane finally landed, the tension in the cabin seemed to break like a spell. Passengers stood, gathering bags, eager to escape the closeness. At baggage claim, Amara spotted Mabel waving above the crowd. Relief surged through her like sunlight breaking through clouds. Mabel opened her arms wide. "There's my girl," Amara rushed into her embrace, letting the tears finally come. "I missed you, Grandma. I missed you so much." Mabel held her tight, whispering, "It's all right now. Baby, you're home." As they walked to the car, Amara recounted the flight, not the turbulence in the air, but the turbulence in her heart. She told Mabel about the confrontation, the kindness of strangers, the cruel words, and the courage it took just to remain herself. Mabel listened, her face shadowed with worry and pride. The world will try to tell you where you don't belong, But you keep showing up. Amara, you keep showing up. That night, as Amara lay in her bed, she replayed the events over and over. She knew there would be more moments like this, tests of her belonging, challenges to her self-worth, reminders that the world did not always see her the way she saw herself. But for the first time, she also knew she was not alone. She carried her grandmother's words, Jasmine's encouragement, the stranger's small act of kindness, and even Daniel's awkward but sincere support. The turbulence was real, but so was her resilience. As sleep finally claimed her, Amara made a silent vow. No matter what came next, she would not let the world shrink her. She would claim her space, her story, her right to fly on planes, in classrooms, in the life she was building, piece by fragile piece. The weeks after Amara's return from Chicago unfurled in a restless, uncertain rhythm. School resumed a blur of algebra, book reports, and cautious sidelong glances from classmates who sensed some subtle change in her. Tanya, quick as always, noticed first. "You're quieter," she said one afternoon as they walked home past the corner bakery. "Different, but not bad different." Amara shrugged, but she didn't argue. How could she explain that the world outside felt larger now, filled with possibilities and dangers she couldn't have named before? Even the city buses seemed different, their mechanical sighs echoing the hush she carried inside her chest. At home, the patterns of comfort and care remained. Mabel hummed gospel tunes as she fried plantains for dinner, kept Amara's favorite mug on the bottom shelf, and always asked, "You sleep all right every morning," like a ritual of love. But beneath the routines, Amara sensed something shifting. Mabel's hands sometimes trembled when she poured tea. Her laughter, always so rich, had grown a little thinner around the edges. One Saturday morning, as a hard rain lashed the windows, Mabel sat at the kitchen table reading a letter from the hospital, her lips pressed into a tight line. When Amara padded in, still in her slippers, Mabel folded the paper away with a too bright smile. "You hungry, baby? I'll make pancakes." But her voice was tired, and the pancakes came out flat. Amara noticed other things, too. The small mountain of unopened mail on the hall table. The way Mabel sometimes paused in the middle of a sentence, searching for a word that wouldn't come. The medicines lined up on the shelf, new bottles every week. Amara tried to ask, "Are you okay, Grandma?" but the question never landed the way she wanted. Mabel always brushed it away with a joke or a pat. One night, after a long coughing fit, Mabel lingered at Amara's bedroom door. Her silhouette, hunched in the hallway light, seemed impossibly small. "If anything ever happened to me," she said softly, "you know you're not alone." "Right." Amara sat up, heart pounding. "Don't say that." Mabel shuffled in and sat on the edge of the bed. She stroked Amara's hair the way she had when Amara was a toddler, chasing away nightmares. "Listen, baby, the world's not fair, but you've got people looking out for you. Miss Johnson next door, Pastor Reed, and your father Daniel. He's trying to be better. You remember that, no matter what." Amara wanted to protest, to insist that Mabel would always be there, but the words caught in her throat, heavy with dread. Instead, she nodded, tucking the moment away like a stone in her pocket, something to carry when the ground shifted. As the days passed, Amara found herself haunted by questions she couldn't voice. What would happen if Mabel got sicker? Who would fight for her at parent-teacher conferences, or sit with her during thunderstorms, or show up at dance recitals, clapping loudest of all her teachers, noticing her distraction, called on her less? At lunch, Tanya nudged her sandwich over and said, "Want to talk?" But Amara shook her head. The words were too tangled, too raw. In the quiet of her room at night, Amara began writing in her journal, not about the trip, or the turbulence, or even the man on the plane, but about the ordinary things that now seemed extraordinary. The smell of Mabel's lotion, the sound of her voice in the morning, the way her laughter filled the house, even on hard days. Then, in mid-February, the hospital called. Mabel was admitted for observation, the cough having worsened into something deeper. The house, so full of her presence, now felt cold and empty. Neighbors came by with casseroles and gentle questions. Pastor Reed left messages on the answering machine. Tanya sat with Amara after school, holding her hand without saying much. The night before Amara was to visit Mabel in the hospital, she received a text message from Daniel. "I heard about your grandma. I'm here if you want to talk." She stared at the phone, thumb hovering. For a long time, she said nothing. But at last, she typed back, her words measured but honest. "Thank you. I'm scared." Daniel replied, "Me too. But you're strong, Amara. You always have been. Let me know if you need anything. Anything at all." She tucked the phone under her pillow, eyes stinging with tears. It was not the reassurance she longed for, but it was something, a signal in the darkness. The hospital was bright and sterile, full of nurses who spoke in low, soothing tones. Amara found Mabel propped up in bed, a blanket tucked around her thin shoulders. She was pale, but her eyes crinkled at the sight of Amara. "Don't you look worried," she said, her voice scratchy but teasing. "They say I'll be fine. Just got to rest up a bit." But when the nurse stepped out, Mabel's bravado faded. She reached for Amara's hand. "Listen to me, baby. I know you don't want to hear this, but there may come a time you need to stay with someone else for a while. Just until I'm better. We got a plan. You hear Miss Johnson, the church folks, even your daddy Daniel. I made sure of it." Amara squeezed her hand, fighting tears. "I want to stay with you, and you will, as soon as I'm better." Mabel managed a weak smile. "But just in case, you keep your head high. Don't let the world knock you down." That night, Amara wandered the quiet house, her thoughts stormy. She wanted to scream, to demand why life had to be so hard, why the universe gave her a taste of belonging only to threaten it again. Instead, she curled up in Mabel's armchair, wrapped in her grandmother's old quilt, and cried silent, angry tears. She thought of Daniel, awkward, uncertain, but trying. She thought of Jasmine and the friends she'd made in Chicago. She thought of the woman on the plane who'd stood up for her, the small kindnesses that had stitched themselves into her soul. She thought of the future, frightening and uncertain, and tried to summon the courage to face it. A week later, Mabel came home. The doctors said she needed rest, medicine, and help with things around the house. Amara took on new chores without complaint, learning to cook rice without burning it, remembering to sort the mail, making sure the medicine bottles were lined up and easy to reach. She grew up in the quiet spaces, learning. Always. That strength was not about never being afraid, but about carrying on, one day at a time. On Sunday afternoon, Daniel visited. He brought groceries, flowers for Mabel, and a shy, hopeful smile for Amara. Over sweet tea and chess, they talked about small things, school, recipes, weather, but beneath it all was the silent understanding that things had changed. As Daniel was leaving, he knelt down to Amara's eye level. "You know," he said softly, "you remind me of your mother. She was tough, too. Braver than I ever was." Amara swallowed. "I don't feel brave." Daniel smiled. "That's when you are, when you keep going anyway." After he left, Amara returned to her room, her heart full of questions. Could she forgive Daniel for the years he'd missed? Could she trust him now? when she needed him most. Was it okay to let herself want family, to hope for something more than survival? She opened her journal and wrote, "I am scared, but I am also strong. I have people who love me, even if they don't always get it right. I am still here." She put down her pen and listened to the sounds of the house, the faint cough from Mabel's room, the hum of the heater, the distant music of children playing outside. She was not alone. Whatever happened next, she would meet it with open eyes, with her heart stitched together by all the pieces of love and loss she had gathered on her journey so far. There was a different feeling to the spring that year, a sense that the world itself was holding its breath. The trees along Amara's street budded cautiously, hesitant to unfurl new leaves in the unpredictable Baltimore air. The community center reopened its after-school tutoring sessions, and kids drifted back into the park, skittering around puddles left by April rain. The city was waking up again. So was Amara, in her own quiet way. Yet, at home, the tension hadn't loosened. Mabel was home from the hospital, but her cough lingered. Some days she seemed herself, humming to old gospel music while folding laundry. Other days she napped for hours, her breathing shallow, her energy fading. Amara was learning what it meant to live in the in-between, to hope, to help, to fear, all at once. She took on more responsibility. Every morning she checked Mabel's medicine, lined up the little plastic cups, and made sure her grandmother had eaten something before school. She memorized the doctor's number. She wrote instructions for herself in a spiral notebook what to do if Mabel got dizzy, what to say to the neighbors if she needed help. Sometimes she felt like a grown-up trapped in a child's body, burdened by worry but still hoping for a kind of ordinary magic, a day with no emergencies, just laughter and warmth. Still, there were moments of light. Tanya came over every weekend, bringing snacks and gossip from school. On good days, Mabel joined them, asking about their classes, making jokes about the old teachers she'd known since Amara's mother was a girl. Miss Johnson from next door started bringing over casseroles, tuna, and noodles, sweet potato with marshmallows, foods that stretched across generations. Sometimes Daniel called, awkward but persistent. "How's your grandma?" he'd ask, voice low. "And how are you?" Amara answered truthfully. But she also kept her guard up, not ready to trust too easily. One Saturday, Daniel showed up at their door with a large bag of groceries and a worried expression. "Can I help with anything?" he asked. Mabel, never one to refuse help when she needed it, nodded. "You can take out the trash, change the light bulb in the hallway, and pick up Amara's prescription." As he moved through the small tasks, Amara watched him with a cautious curiosity. She saw how he flinched when Mabel coughed, how he checked the clock nervously, how his hand shook a little as he handed her the bag from the pharmacy. He was trying, that much was clear, but there was a hesitance to his movements, a man who wanted to belong but didn't know how. Later that day, after Daniel had gone and the house was quiet, Mabel looked at Amara over the rim of her teacup. "He's scared," she said softly, "but he's here. That's more than some folks ever do." Amara nodded, not trusting herself to say more. The following week, Amara's school held its annual spring talent show. She hadn't planned to perform. She'd been too busy, too tired, too distracted by worry. But Tanya, as always, was relentless. "You gotta do it," Tanya insisted, cornering Amara at her locker. "You're the only one who makes that poem sound like it matters. Come on, I'll stand with you on stage." So, on a Thursday night, Amara found herself in the glare of cafeteria stage lights, hands trembling, clutching a wrinkled sheet of paper. Her poem wasn't about heroes or dreams or fame. It was about small things, the smell of rain on cracked sidewalks, the way her grandmother called her baby even when she was mad, the echo of gospel music through thin apartment walls. It was about waiting for news, hoping for the best, holding on to ordinary love. She read with a shaky voice at first, but as Tanya stood beside her, nodding encouragement, the words came easier. By the end, the room was quiet, kids and parents and teachers all listening. When she finished, there was a ripple of applause, then real loud clapping cheers from the back where Mabel sat, wrapped in a shawl, tears in her eyes. Afterward, as the crowd thinned and the cafeteria emptied, Mabel hugged her close. "You got your mama's way with words," she whispered. "You make folks feel something." That night, Amara wrote in her journal, "Sometimes the scariest things are the things you have to say out loud. But when you do, you find you're not as alone as you think." A few days later, Daniel called again. This time, Amara picked up on the second ring. "I heard about your poem," he said. "Tanya's mom filmed it. You were amazing." Amara was quiet, not sure what to say. Daniel tried again. "I'm proud of you." The words hung in the air between them, strange and heavy, full of all the years he hadn't been there to say them. Amara swallowed. "Thank you." They talked a while longer about school, about Mabel's health, about the weather turning warmer. At the end, Daniel asked, "Would you like to come with me to the park this Saturday? There's a street festival, food, music, just the two of us, if you want." Amara hesitated. She thought of all the years she'd wanted him to show up, of all the ways he hadn't. She thought of the effort it took to trust, to believe in second chances. "I'll think about it," she said, and she did. For the next 2 days, she replayed the conversation over and over. Was she ready to let him in, even a little? Would it be worth it, even if it hurt in the end? She decided to try not for him, but for herself, for the piece of her that still believed in hope. The festival was a riot of color and sound music blaring from speakers, smells of barbecue and funnel cake drifting through the air. Daniel met her by the main gate, holding 2 tickets and looking nervous in his old Orioles cap. They wandered through the booths, tasted spicy chicken wings, listened to a band playing Marvin Gaye covers. Daniel bought her a lemonade, and they sat on the curb, watching kids dance in a circle. "Did you ever do this with my mom?" Amara asked, surprising herself. Daniel's smile faded. "Once, a long time ago. She loved music, couldn't dance for nothing, but she'd try. I was too busy working back then, always telling her I'd take her next time. But there wasn't always a next time." Amara heard regret in his voice, real, raw, not the practiced sorrow of apology, but something older and deeper. They walked some more. Daniel told her about his job night shifts at the warehouse, sometimes security work on weekends. "It's not fancy," he said, "but it's honest." Amara nodded. She appreciated the honesty more than she could say. As the sun set, Daniel turned to her. "I know I wasn't there before. I can't change that, but I want to try now if you'll let me." Amara looked away, watching a group of girls chase each other with glow sticks. She felt the familiar swirl of anger and longing, forgiveness and caution. It would be easier to say no, to protect herself, but she didn't want to be ruled by fear. Not anymore. "I can try too," she said quietly. Daniel smiled, and in that moment, Amara saw the possibility of something new, a relationship not built on the past, but on the effort to show up, to be present, to care. The next week, life returned to its steady rhythm. Mabel's health was stable for now. Tanya and Amara spent afternoons at the library, working on end-of-year projects. The mail kept coming. Amara grew more comfortable with change, more accepting of her own uncertainty. One evening, as she helped Mabel sort laundry, Mabel said, "You know, storms don't last forever. Even the hard ones pass, and when they do, the world feels new." Amara tucked that wisdom away, a quiet truth to hold close when the next storm rolled in. That night, she wrote in her journal, "I'm learning that being strong doesn't mean never hurting. It means you keep going anyway. I'm learning that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, even when you don't think you're ready. I'm learning that hope is the bravest thing there is." And as she drifted off to sleep, Amara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging, not just to her family, but to herself, to the life she was slowly, stubbornly building. Baltimore in early May was a city between storms. Some afternoons were drenched in sunlight, windows wide open to let in the promise of summer. Other days, clouds muscled in, bringing brief, hard rains that swept the sidewalks clean and left the city smelling of fresh earth and concrete. Amara walked these streets with her head full of questions about herself, her family, and the strange future that seemed to hover just out of reach. School was winding down. Her teachers grew softer as the year's end approached, the pressure of tests fading, replaced by the gentle encouragement to finish strong. Amara's grades were steady, good enough to make Mabel proud and keep her in the running for a summer enrichment program at the library. Tanya was excited for it. Too, they planned to sign up together, hoping for days spent reading in the cool quiet, escaping the sticky heat outside. At home, the rhythm of care continued. Mabel had a new prescription, a twice-weekly nurse, and a stubborn resolve that she would be strong enough to attend church on Sunday. Amara watched her grandmother with new eyes, not just as a caretaker or a guardian, but as a whole person, sometimes tired, sometimes sharp, always loving. There was comfort in their routines, folding clothes side by side, stirring soup on the stove, watering the porch plants before bed. But there were new questions, too. Each night, as Amara brushed her teeth and turned out her light, she wondered about the future. She wondered about Daniel, if his efforts would last, if she could trust this new version of him. She wondered about her mother, whose memory lingered in the framed photographs on Mabel's mantel, smiling and young, as if time had paused for her. She wondered about herself, about the kind of person she was becoming in the aftermath of so much change. One Saturday morning, as sunlight crept across the kitchen table, Amara sat with a letter in her hand. It was from Daniel, delivered by regular mail, addressed in his messy block handwriting. She hesitated before opening it, the old mixture of hope and dread curling in her stomach. Inside, the letter was short, but careful. Amara. I'm glad we spent time together last weekend. I know I can't fix the past, but I want to keep trying. If you ever want to talk about anything, I'll be here. Maybe we could go to the aquarium next time, or just get ice cream and walk by the harbor. Proud of you always, Daniel. She folded the letter and tucked it in her drawer with her journal and the faded photo of her mother holding her as a baby. The invitation was open, gentle, no pressure, no expectation, just the promise of presence. Later that week, after her homework was done and Mabel was napping, Amara sat on the stoop and watched the street come alive. Neighbors swept their steps, kids bounced basketballs, music drifted from an upstairs window. It was an ordinary evening, the kind that made her feel safe and restless all at once. Miss Johnson from next door stopped by, setting a bag of groceries at Amara's feet. "Your grandma told me you like strawberries," she said, smiling. They had a sale at the market. "Thank you," Amara said, meaning it. Miss Johnson looked at her for a moment, then sat down beside her. "You're a good girl, Amara. I see how much you do, how hard you try. I hope you know you're not alone." Amara blinked, surprised by the kindness. "Sometimes I feel like I am. That's just the world talking," Miss Johnson said. "But it isn't true. You got folks looking out for you. Your grandma, your friends, maybe even your daddy." Now, they sat together for a while, watching the sun set over the row houses, listening to the world quiet down. That night, as Amara wrote in her journal, she found herself struggling to put her feelings into words. She wanted to be brave. She wanted to forgive, to let go of old hurts, but it was harder than it sounded. Sometimes the anger flared up when she least expected it, a memory, a song, a passing comment from a friend about their own families. Sometimes she envied the kids who seemed to have it easy, whose parents showed up for every recital, every parent-teacher conference, every sick day. She envied the kids who didn't have to wonder if love would last. Still, she was learning that her story mattered, that her questions were worth asking, even if the answers came slowly. "Am I enough?" she wrote, then crossed it out. "Can I trust this new beginning? What if I get hurt again? What if I don't?" The next weekend, Daniel kept his promise. He picked Amara up after lunch, and they rode the city bus down to the harbor, where seagulls wheeled overhead and tourists snapped photos by the water. The aquarium was crowded, cool, full of light and movement. They walked slowly through the exhibits, watching jellyfish drift behind glass, sharks cut through blue shadows, children pressing their faces to the glass in wonder. Daniel tried to explain everything, how the octopus changed color, how the turtles found their way home, but sometimes he just watched, letting Amara set the pace. At the touch pool, she let a horseshoe crab crawl across her palm. Its shell was hard and cold, but it moved gently, as if it knew she was afraid. "Did you know," Daniel said, "that horseshoe crabs are older than the dinosaurs?" Amara nodded. "I read about them in science class. They survive storms, predators, all kinds of things." Daniel smiled, pride flickering in his eyes. "You're like that, too. Stronger than you think." The words settled into her bones, warm and surprising. She didn't answer, but she let herself believe it, just for a moment. On the way home, they stopped for ice cream. Daniel let her pick the flavors, chocolate and peanut butter, with rainbow sprinkles. They ate on a bench, watching boats drift in the distance. "Thank you for coming," Daniel said quietly. "Thank you for asking," Amara replied. They rode the bus home in comfortable silence. As Amara climbed the steps to her apartment, Daniel called after her, "I'll see you soon." "Okay?" Amara nodded, waving as the bus pulled away. Back home, the lights were on, and Mabel was waiting in the kitchen, sipping tea. She smiled when Amara walked in, her face soft with relief. "Good time?" she asked. "Yeah," Amara said, sitting down. "It was good." They sat together for a while, talking about the day, about jellyfish and ice cream and the way the city sparkled by the water. Mabel squeezed her hand. "You're growing up, baby. I see it every day. And I'm proud of you, too." Amara swallowed, feeling the knot in her chest loosen. "I just want to make you happy." Mabel's eyes filled with tears. "You already do." That night, before bed, Amara looked at her family's photos, her mother, young and radiant, Mabel, strong and loving, herself, somewhere in between, growing into her own story. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she was learning to trust the questions, to find her way through the quiet spaces between storms. As she drifted to sleep, she heard her grandmother's voice, soft, steady, and sure you're not alone, never have been, never will be. And for the first time in a long while, Amara believed it. May slipped into June, and with the end of school came the beginning of Baltimore's long, humid summer. Amara felt the shift in the city's air slow, heavy, as if the clouds were waiting for something to break. For her, the days stretched and contracted in strange ways. Some afternoons felt endless and bright, filled with laughter and neighborhood sounds. Others were shadowed by the uncertainties swirling around her family's future. The trip back to the airplane this time for a summer science program sponsored by a foundation linked to Daniel's company brought Amara's journey full circle. The first time she'd flown, it had been as a frightened, uncertain girl on the edge of a secret. Now, she was traveling with Mabel at her side and Daniel meeting them at the airport gate. The boarding gate was different, the destination less mysterious, but the old feelings tugged at her heart. As she settled into her window seat, Amara looked around at the faces boarding the plane business travelers with briefcases, families with restless children, a cluster of college students with matching shirts and loud voices. Daniel took his seat across the aisle, giving her space but not distance. Mabel, nervous but determined, sat next to Amara, holding her hand with the same grip she'd used when Amara was 5 and terrified of thunderstorms. The flight attendant, a tall, silver-haired woman named Ms. Carter smiled warmly at them as she checked seatbelts and offered ginger ale. "First flight for you." "Sweetheart," she asked Mabel, noting the tension in the older woman's posture. "Not quite," Mabel replied, voice steady but thin. "But it's been a while." Amara caught Daniel watching the exchange with gentle worry. This time, she saw it not as guilt, but as something closer to care, a real, if tentative, attempt to be present for both of them. As the plane rose above the city, Amara pressed her forehead to the cool window, watching the familiar streets shrink into a grid of lights and shadow. Her mind wandered to the last flight, the fear, the turbulence, the impossible secret that had landed in her lap somewhere over the Atlantic. She wondered if anyone else on this plane was carrying something so heavy, so hidden, that a sudden jolt of air or a chance encounter could change everything. The in-flight hours were punctuated by small, ordinary moments that made the newness of family feel almost normal. Mabel laughed at Daniel's corny jokes. Amara explained how she planned to spend her week in the science lab coding robots, dissecting owl pellets, learning to map the stars. Daniel showed them both a photograph on his phone, Amara's mother, as a teenager, grinning atop a Ferris wheel. The picture was old, a little faded, but sharp with memory. "She was brave," Daniel said quietly, turning the screen so Mabel could see. "And stubborn. I see that in Amara every day." Mabel's eyes softened. "She got her kindness from you, Daniel, even if you forgot how to use it for a while." Daniel nodded, taking the words as both forgiveness and reminder. Amara watched them, feeling the subtle gravity shift in her world. Old hurts didn't just vanish, but they could be folded into something new. She closed her eyes and let the drone of the engines lull her, half dreaming of a life where the storms were survivable, where people tried and failed and tried again. Later, turbulence shook the plane, not the violent, terrifying kind from her first trip, but a gentler rocking that rattled the cups and made babies cry. Amara felt Mabel's hand tense around hers. "It's okay," Amara said, squeezing back. "It'll pass." "Ms." Carter came down the aisle, steady on her feet. "Nothing to worry about, folks. Just a little rough air." She winked at Amara and handed her an extra napkin for her drink. The gesture was small but reassuring, a reminder that strangers could be kind, that sometimes the world offered small comforts when you needed them most. When the plane landed, Daniel walked with them through the terminal, carrying Mabel's bag, his arm a quiet shield around her shoulders. They stepped into the heat of the new city Atlanta this time for Amara's program and paused, blinking in the sunlight. Daniel turned to Amara. "Serious now. You know, it means a lot to me that you wanted to come." Amara shrugged. Awkward, but honest. "I wanted to learn something new. And I wanted to try, too." Mabel, watching them both, smiled. Learning and trying, that's what family is all about. Daniel nodded, and for a moment, the awkwardness between them faded. Amara felt something settle, something she hadn't realized she'd been waiting for. Maybe this was what people meant by forgiveness, not forgetting, not excusing, but allowing for the chance of something better. The science camp was a whirlwind. Amara dove into her projects with the quiet ferocity that always surprised her teachers. She made friends from other cities, learned to solder circuit boards, lost a trivia contest by one question, but won the respect of her group by taking the loss with grace. She wrote emails to Tanya back home, describing the strange cafeteria food and the thrill of holding a snake for the first time. In the evenings, she called Mabel and Daniel, recounting her small victories and frustrations. The check-ins grew easier, less like obligation, more like sharing a piece of herself that she was just starting to trust again. But under the surface, questions churned. What would happen when she went home? Would Daniel keep showing up? Or would he fade back into the gray space he'd occupied for so long? Would Mabel's health hold? Would Amara's mother always be just a photograph in a story? Or could she find a way to keep her memory alive without letting grief control her? One night, after the lights were out and the dorm was quiet, Amara lay awake and let her thoughts run wild. She imagined herself 5 years from now, older, stronger, braver. She saw herself flying alone to new places, chasing her dreams, building a family of her own making. In her mind, she carried Mabel's laughter, Daniel's cautious hope, her mother's courage. The future was still a fog, but it no longer felt empty. At the end of the week, Mabel and Daniel came to watch Amara present her final project, a simple robot that could follow a trail of light. She stood at the front of the classroom, nervous at first, but then steady as she explained her process and her setbacks. The applause at the end was loud, but it was Daniel's quiet, "Well done, kiddo," and Mabel's teary pride that meant the most. Afterward, they found a bench outside the science center and watched the sun set over the city skyline. "I'm proud of you," Daniel said, his voice rough. Mabel put her arm around Amara. "I always knew you'd shine." Amara looked from one to the other, a strange fullness in her chest. "Thank you for being here, both of you, for a long time." They sat together in the warm, buzzing dusk. No one said much. There was nothing left to fix, no apology that hadn't already been made. There was just the quiet miracle of a family, bruised but breathing, holding space for each other as the world kept turning. On the flight home, Amara watched the clouds drift by below, cotton and gold in the setting sun. She wrote in her journal, words spilling out with the easy honesty she had earned. "This isn't the ending. Not for me. Not for us. The storms come and go, but the people I love are learning to stand with me in the weather. I'm learning, too." She closed the journal, smiled at Mabel, asleep beside her, and glanced at Daniel across the aisle, already nodding off with a book in his lap. As the plane banked gently toward Baltimore, Amara let herself hope not just for calm skies, but for the strength to face whatever storms might come. Baltimore in mid-July pulsed with heat and energy. Kids ran through the spray of a busted hydrant. Radios thumped bass into the evening, and the sky glowed orange behind a patchwork of row houses. For Amara Ellis, stepping off the plane this time felt nothing like it had a year before. The city was the same, but she was changed. Mabel squeezed her hand as they made their way through baggage claim. "Home again, baby," her grandmother said, a smile creasing her tired face. Daniel trailed behind, wheeling their suitcase and offering a rare, easy laugh when Mabel scolded him for nearly running over her toes. It was a scene so ordinary, so absurdly normal, that Amara felt a sharp gratitude cut through her chest. Their neighbor, Mrs. Henley, met them at the curb, waving wildly from her battered Honda. "Y'all get in, I got air conditioning and lemonade waiting." On the drive home, they recounted stories from Atlanta Amara's robot, Mabel's first time eating grits with shrimp, Daniel's unsuccessful attempt to two-step at a festival. The laughter came easily now, less brittle, as if they'd all finally decided it was safe to let down their guards. At home, the apartment was cooler than usual, the fan humming in the window. Amara dropped her bag and wandered to her room. The walls, still lined with books and sketches, seemed to welcome her back, no longer just a refuge from secrets, but a space big enough to hold everything she'd learned about herself and her family. That evening, as Mabel napped and Daniel called into a late work meeting, Amara sat on the stoop and watched the neighborhood. Tanya plopped down next to her, slurping a melted popsicle. "So, you're famous now," Tanya teased, waving her phone. "Your science camp video is all over our group chat." Amara snorted. "It's not like I cured cancer. I built a light-following robot." "Yeah, but you built it," Tanya said, nudging her. "I knew you could." Amara grinned, letting the warmth of ordinary friendship settle around her. As the sun set, Daniel joined them outside, hands in his pockets, awkward but trying. "You, want to get pizza?" he asked. "My treat. Extra cheese." Amara nodded. Tanya leapt up, already shouting inside for Mabel, and, for the first time in memory, Amara realized she wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. This was her life, messy, beautiful, unfinished. That weekend, Amara found herself alone in the apartment, the others out shopping. On impulse, she pulled out the old locket Daniel had given her, her mother's face on one side, Daniel's on the other, the past staring back at her with equal parts sorrow and promise. She sat at the table and wrote a letter. "Dear Mom, I wish you could see me now. I think you'd be proud not just of my grades or my robot, but of the way I'm learning to forgive, to trust, to let people in even when it's hard. I see you in my smile, in the way I fight for what's right. I see Daniel in my stubbornness, in the way I want to fix things. And I see Mabel every time I remember to be gentle, to listen, to hold on tight when the world feels like it's spinning. I don't know what comes next, but I know I'm strong enough to find out. Love, Amara." She folded the letter and tucked it into the locket, right behind her mother's photograph. August brought both new beginnings and old challenges. Mabel's health, always a delicate balance, took a turn. Hospital visits, long afternoons in waiting rooms, whispered worries. Amara, frightened but determined, stepped up cooking, cleaning, helping with bills. Daniel juggled flights back and forth, making time for every doctor's appointment, every phone call, every emergency. He wasn't perfect. He fumbled with chores, sometimes lost his temper, but he kept showing up. The difference, Amara realized, was that this time he wasn't running away from the hard parts. One night, after a particularly tough hospital visit, Amara found Daniel sitting alone at the kitchen table, head in his hands. She poured him some water and sat beside him. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice low. "I know I don't have a right to ask, but—" "Can I help? Can I stay?" Amara reached for his hand, the gesture small but brave. "We need you here. I need you, but I need you to promise you won't leave if it gets hard." Daniel squeezed her hand back. "I won't. I promise." And just like that, the walls between them dropped a little more. In September, they got a call from Arizona. Amara's mother, Liana, was having a good stretch. The doctors thought she was ready for visitors again. Amara, heart pounding, packed her suitcase, carefully folding letters, sketches, her science camp certificate, the locket. The plane ride this time felt different, lighter, less like escape, more like a journey toward something unfinished but possible. Daniel sat beside her, reading quietly, his presence calm. Mabel dozed, her head on Amara's shoulder. The flight attendant smiled at her, recognizing the little girl from a year ago, now taller, more certain. At the hospital, Liana was waiting in a courtyard full of sunflowers. Her hair was longer, her eyes brighter. She hugged Amara fiercely, and this time Amara hugged back without hesitation. They talked for hours about robots and science and forgiveness and pizza and the simple, everyday miracles of staying, of trying, of letting go. At one point, Liana grew quiet. "I'm sorry I missed so much," she whispered. Amara smiled, tears in her eyes. "You're here now. That matters." The three generations sat together in the sun, sharing stories, laughter, and the quiet, hard-won peace of being a family, reknitted not by blood alone, but by choice and forgiveness. The year turned. There were more storms, some fierce, some passing quickly. There were new joys, too: Amara's first science fair ribbon, Mabel's slow recovery, Daniel's awkward but earnest attempts at being a real dad. And through it all, Amara kept writing in her journal, to her mother, to herself. She wrote about fear, about anger, about hope and disappointment, and the strange beauty of loving people who sometimes fail you. She wrote about flying, how sometimes the scariest turbulence is the kind you can't see, the kind that lives inside you, waiting to be named and faced. One day, as she sat by the window, watching a summer storm break over the city, Amara realized she wasn't afraid of what came next. Her story was hers now, no longer the secret of a poor girl who saved a millionaire, but a living, breathing testament to surviving, to choosing love, to beginning again. The world outside was complicated, still full of injustice, of wounds and struggles. But in her heart, Amara held a simple, stubborn hope, a hope that, with patience and honesty and courage, any story could find a new beginning. If you followed Amara's journey, thank you. Her story is the story of many of families lost and found, of forgiveness that doesn't come easy, of learning to trust in the midst of storms. If you carry secrets or pain, remember you are not alone, and your story, too, can open into light. Subscribe for more true stories of resilience, love, and the quiet strength that changes lives. Comment below what part of Amara's journey moved you most. What have you learned about forgiveness and family? The sky outside cleared, and Amara, strong and steady, stepped forward into whatever came next, her story unwritten, her heart wide open. As the final echoes of Amara's journey fade, we're left with more than just the memory of a courageous girl and a fractured family. We're reminded that love isn't measured by wealth or blood alone, but by the choices we make when life asks us to be brave, to be honest, to reach across the divides we inherit. This story calls out the quiet cruelty of discrimination, the way a single moment, a word, or a policy can split lives apart. But it also celebrates the power of empathy, resilience, and the bonds that form when we refuse to let hate have the last word. Amara's path was never simple. She faced the shadows of abandonment, the pain of prejudice, and the risks of opening her heart to those who once walked away. Yet, through it all, she chose to believe in the possibility of change, not just for her family, but for herself. If Amara's story moved you, if it made you reflect or stirred your own memories, please like, share, and subscribe. Your voice matters. Join our community as we shine a light on untold stories, challenge injustice, and celebrate the strength that lives in us all. Stay with us for the next chapter, because everyone deserves a seat at the table and every story deserves to be heard.